about gun control. So guys, would you like to introduce yourself? Johnny Walker Dread is well known, to my audience. So Sean, would you like to go first?
Yeah, well,
Sure.
my name's Sean. Sorry, and my
That's
name's
okay.
Sean.
I thought he was asking me to go first, so go ahead.
No, everybody knows about you already. My name's Sean. I started the Speakeasy Review channels with my friend Dixon, who is going to try to pop on. He's having some issues. We started a channel that started off as film reviews and then went down true crime. And then we started talking about Kyle Rittenhouse, and the gun conversation came up quite a bit. And I've been living in the UK for 16 years, and my perspective on guns has changed drastically since I moved here 16 years ago. And I think that's how I've entered the conversation. I'm somebody who wants to really explore gun control and how we can change things with, the current homicide rates, things like that. And I was really intrigued listening to your dialogue a couple weeks ago. Hence why I reached out to see if we could have a chat.
Cool. So, Johnny, would you like to say a few words about you?
Yeah, I'm Johnny Walker Dread. I have my own YouTube channel that's mostly dedicated to, I would say, events surrounding cop shootings and just shootings in general, especially anything that's racially charged. But the Kenosha shooting is probably where most people know me from, the Kyle Rittenhouse deal. I have, I think, 300 plus videos on Kyle. And I've had like 3 of the witnesses in the trial on my stream at some point or another. So I've had a lot of work with, the Kenosha shootings. But if you're interested in anything like the Patrick Lyoya shooting or anything like that, go on over to my channel. I probably have a lot of videos on it. And of course, gun control is another one of my deals. I'm a very active, I'm not say active, but I'm a very pro-gun enthusiast.
Okay. Cool. So anyway, we have one, more participant, Andrew. He apparently teaches English. So as many of my professors, always was, busting our balls when we were a wee bit late, but he himself comes late. So Andrew, you're live. Would you like to introduce yourself, mate?
Sure. I'm Andrew Dixon. Yes, I do teach. I adjunct a class at Rowan University in English literature. I have for several years. I also work with. I had been working with teachers, then I was working with nurses. Now I'm back to teachers, and in terms of their just professional organizations, things like that assist and support them. This issue is an interesting one to me because it does sit at the intersection of some things that I do think are important. Civil liberties are very important. But obviously, whenever you're talking about civil liberties, it's always a question of where do mine end and someone else's begin. So I think that's always the interesting question. And I apologize for not having video. I had been using a work laptop, and I'm changing jobs as of Friday. So I turned that in, and I don't have the new one yet. And my desktop does not have a webcam. So I am coming to you audio only today. My little old MacBook does not handle this software. It rejected it. So
Dixon's a handsome guy. You're really missing out.
Oh, you really are. You are. I have to say.
Okay, cool. By the way, since we are simulcasting this to 2 other channels, cheers, my name is Paul. I come from the Czech Republic, in the heart of Europe. We are quite gun-friendly here, and we are one of the safest countries in the world. We simply managed to find a balance between having access to firearms and, well, I'll be honest, not having our kids shot in school. So, guys, if I may also say, just quickly, I'm sorry, usually, I have a green screen, right now I am at my parents, I have a holiday, so, yeah, kind of a caveman, dwell. Anywho, so, we will be, talking about the gun control in US, and I would like to just quickly point out that my position is, well, none, actually, because it is not my place to say what you do and stuff like that, what you want, that is entirely up to you. My purpose on this platform, meaning YouTube, always was to bring truth, facts, and the full story in all its complexities. So that will be my role, today, to be a wee bit more of the moderator. However, I am definitely a pro-gun person. So That's that. And since I started, like I think it would be a pretty good idea to go around, and if you guys could tell, like your positions, for example, on gun control, on, like what you're basically arguing for, what do you think is a good idea, and keep it, like as brief as possible, yeah? So, Sean, would you like to go first?
Yes, brevity. I think I want to go at this conversation from the perspective. I think I have a very Socratic method way of investigating issues. And when we talk about guns, I having lived in the States, I came over here, very much with the whole mantra of, guns kill people. Sorry, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And I wasn't a gun owner, so I wasn't somebody who necessarily was really au fait with what guns are, caliber, shit like that. And if anything, I always felt like if somebody broke in the house and I scared them off with a baseball bat, that looked way more badass than shooting someone in the face. And that was sort of the thing I always went down. Living in the UK for the last 16 years, you realize that living just in the Philadelphia area, you become desensitized to the fact that every single night you hear about somebody being shot and killed on the news. It was a common occurrence. Now, I don't want to go down the route of hyperbole, but I remember growing up, it was fairly common and it wasn't like a big deal. And I think part of it is you hear it every night as a kid. And as I was living in the UK, I realized after a few years that nobody was getting shot. Now, again, I don't want to go down hyperbole. People do get shot here. But I realized there's cities and streets in America I won't walk down. I'm 6'3", about 280 pounds, and I feel quite comfortable that I can handle myself to a degree. In the UK, there isn't a street there is not a street in the UK I would be afraid to walk down. This is markedly a safer place for me to live. And I started to ask questions and started to look at the data behind homicides in other countries and homicides in the US. And I know, Johnny, you do have an opinion about why we shouldn't be comparing those. But for me, when I start listening to the debates in the US, I struggle with what people are talking about. So whenever people say, I don't want you to take away my guns, I have yet to hear a politician even say, we want to take away people's guns. And, on the other side of the coin, when I hear liberals talking about guns, liberals, and I don't like referring to right and left. You've probably heard, if you've watched any of my stuff, you hear me say, I don't like referring to the right and the left as sort of positions. But you hear liberals who maybe don't understand that there's 400 million guns and you can't just take them all away. So I think for me, I just want to get down to the core on why we're not talking about the issues. Why are we ignoring the homicides? And that's my position. I want to explore it in a different way than we have. I hope that wasn't too long, Paul.
Oh, it's all good, mate. So, Johnny, would you like to take the, next step?
The opposite of everything that Sean said.
So this will be good,
So, I mean, my perspective is based on a number of things, and one is, and I've been shooting guns since I was 9. I had a 30-30 when I was 9, which is not a small caliber gun, but and also living in Oklahoma, where we have probably more guns per capita than you can shake a fist at. However, there's not a place in Oklahoma that I wouldn't feel safe walking around in. East End of London versus maybe even Muskogee is probably the worst. I don't think there'd be a lot of difference. Now, admittedly, in the East End, you're probably going to get knifed, but but the idea that, and I think that a lot of people think that Americans must just walk outside and be in just total fear of going to the grocery store. Nah, I could walk anywhere in Oklahoma at night. No one's gonna. I don't feel like I would be unsafe. But the gun ownership here is sky high. It's probably higher than anywhere in the country.
Right. Okay. So, Andrew, your microphone is muted, babe.
I'm unmuted. You guys can hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
And I apologize again for the lack of video, and I do feel it's a little unfair to Johnny. 2 against 1. Wait, can you not hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go for it.
Okay.
We can hear you.
2 against 1, but obviously I share a lot of Sean's views. I think the way I come at this is, I remember my father was very, very pro-gun, and that's an interesting thing that we could talk about. He actually taught he was a counselor at a summer camp where at the summer camp he was at, they shot BB guns because it's for 6 to 8 year olds. And then there was, at the time, there was like a companion camp. When you got to be 9, you would go to the companion camp, and there they shot 22 caliber rifles. And I went to both because he worked at the one, so I got to go to both for free, even though they were relatively fancy summer camps and we couldn't have afforded them otherwise. And he actually told me as much as he was very pro-gun, he refused to work at Bluebell Senior Camp because he didn't want to be responsible for a bunch of 9-year-olds with rifles. He wanted to, BBs were okay, rifles scared him off too much. He was a very cautious kind of person. But that's not why I'm, I have an idea for gun control. It's that I bring him up because I remember having these discussions with him. And he certainly had some points. And in fact, the guy who owned the camp said about my father and a couple of campers once. And I thought this was a good point and a good lesson. Now, he's certainly my side of the political aisle, the guy who owned the camp, and not very pro-gun or anything. But he talked about how a couple of campers from his camp were in a park one day, and they found a handgun in a paper bag. And they had been in my father's, he'd been through the camp, so they'd done riflery at the camp. And he found out this story later because it was after camp was over. And he found out that they knew what to do when they found a gun. Because my father had spent 2 weeks before you were ever allowed to shoot anything, rules of how to handle a gun. They find an adult, they turn it in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, there are reasons and good reasons even to, since guns are going to exist, Sean's right, to be thoughtful about how we expose kids to guns. And maybe, sometimes instead of just putting up on the shelf and saying, don't touch, giving kids the opportunity to handle and know how to handle correctly makes some sense. But on the other hand, and this is why I invoked my father's name in the first place, when we would discuss these things, I asked him one day as we were debating it back and forth, because I don't think any rational person would answer this question any other way. Would you be comfortable with your next door neighbor owning a nuclear weapon? And of course, the answer is no. No, you don't want a private citizen owning a nuclear weapon for obvious reasons. But once you've acknowledged that, we've acknowledged the principle. Now we're only talking about a question of degree. And I think that, unfortunately, in the fullness of time, what we've discovered is that as nice and as awesome, perhaps, as it is, it's not something I'm attached to, but I understand that other people might be, to take an AR-15 and shoot it at the range with their buddies and, have a good time. I get all that. But the risk associated with making those things available to the general public is, unfortunately, and it's really a very small percentage of people will obviously do something like that, but it does ruin it for everyone. And it's not tolerable to have a situation where you could theoretically have any day, on any given day, somebody walk into an elementary school and start shooting up kindergartners. It cannot be. It cannot be. And that's really the position that I hold.
Okay, fair enough. We will, definitely go through it. I bet a wee bit more going forward. Yes, since I'm basically a moderator here, my position on this, don't particularly care, you guys have your stuff, but if I may, just how we have it, in the Czech Republic, is, and don't forget, you cannot just copy paste it, because we are in the end, also different people. So what works for us, doesn't have to work for everyone in the United States. So we can have basically any weapon, firearm, that is, from pistols, to rifles, to AR-15s. Even we prefer CZ Brand 2, so that's just better, and up to 20 millimeter cannons. Yeah. It's completely a-okay, when there are gun amnesties, people are literally returning, artillery pieces, tank destroyers, anti-aircraft cannons and stuff like that. That comes, with being post-communistic country, and being on the front lines of the Cold War. And so we are, also one of the safest, countries there is. And when it comes to legal gun ownership, that is quite strict, how to obtain a gun license compared to the United States. A person first needs to go through the regular background checks, obviously, criminals, for the most part, cannot have weapons. There are obviously exceptions, or periods of time when let's say a petty thief can possess firearms, but then, there's psychological evaluation that is quite thorough. Then you need to go through training that is both theoretical, when you can use firearm defensively, when you cannot use firearms, how to safely store them, etc. Like what is legal, what is illegal, basically. Then you go also through practical, training, how to take care of your firearm, how to disassemble it, assemble it, how to clean it, and in the end also a marksmanship test. Basically, if we let you have a firearm, we need to make sure that you will hit what you're aiming at. A bad guy instead of a kid, like in the background. So. And we can lose our gun license if someone, for example, speeds a lot. That demonstrates that person doesn't respect, like the laws and stuff like that, and is rather not responsible. But these are temporary, what I mean, suspensions and stuff like that. They can get the license back. Yeah. So that's like how we have it. And in my opinion, this works for us just fine. Yeah, but I obviously understand that it doesn't have to work for everyone. Anyway, if I just might, quickly, Sean, Andrew, what do you think about, basically this system? Also Johnny, then.
Well, I actually want to follow up on that. I'm glad you went into that in detail, because I've spent the last couple of weeks looking at countries specifically that are fairly have a high gun ownership per capita. And there's reoccurring themes. And I think, Johnny, I'm glad you're on the call as far as, having an Oklahoma experience, because Oklahoma is quite the contrast to that. I did look up Oklahoma's gun laws, or whatever gun laws there are in Oklahoma. They're very minimal at best. Oh. And the consistent pattern for countries that do have high capita gun ownership, Austria, Germany, Switzerland is a good example. Switzerland is very similar to the Czech Republic in how they assess who and how can have a gun. And that, for me, I think is, shows that it is workable in society to have a right to bear arms safely. Because I think my big issue is when you have open carry, and you do have open carry, at least concealed carry, I think in the Czech Republic is an example.
Concealed carry, yes.
Yeah. You can, I don't necessarily agree with that, but, I'm also happy to look at the data and back the facts up that you're right. Czech Republic, the homicide rate is very similar to the UK. And UK has very limited gun ownership. But
just saying we are a safer country than UK, yeah. So also that
statistically, it's difficult to say. It's marginal at best, and that's going to change year on year.
Sure.
However, what I have an issue with the conceal or open carry, and there's another piece I'm going to talk about in a bit as far as the culture of guns in America, which I think is a bigger problem. But when we marshal, people make themselves sort of a protector of the people. And I think Kyle Rittenhouse was a good example of that. Police, Navy SEALs train a hell of a long time to be able to make decisions on how and when to shoot people. And even police, when they have to shoot somebody, it's difficult to for the first time I would imagine, and I'm not going to propose to know everything about this. I don't know anything, but I would expect it's very difficult the first time you aim a gun and shoot somebody if you have any sort of scruples. And when you put a civilian who hasn't had any training in a position where they're the good guy with the gun, I struggle with somebody with no training becoming that person to save the day, because it's very easy for them to make that mistake and to shoot the wrong person, make that last minute decision incorrectly. And I think that's where the problem is. I get a bit of the thing I like about the Czech Republic is the amount of training that goes into, gun owners being able to prove that they should be able to have a gun and carry a gun. I don't think in Oklahoma that happens, and I have a problem with that.
Okay. Well, first of all, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure where you were going with Kyle Rittenhouse, but he really had no training. But let's be clear. He was attacked by a number of people. He got out alive, and they didn't. That's exemplary. I watched, and I've handled guns all my life. And I'm watching him. I'm thinking, I don't think I could have done better.
Yeah,
I think I would have shot probably 7 or 8 people.
Yeah, and if I may, I spoke with Czech SWAT officers. They said, he handled himself exemplary. Yeah. So just to set it straight.
So we'll get that out of the way. The one thing that I want to also bring up is, I get that there are the other country argument. We sit on the border of a third world country that could be an easy supply of anything that's in demand. and their ability to stop it would be almost minimal. That's a difference. The other one is that we do have, as you mentioned, 400 million guns already here. So people always say, well, why can't we be like the Czech Republic? We can't, because we're not the Czech Republic. There's also another issue, and that is that the United States has a long pioneer heritage where guns play a bigger role in our culture than in most countries. And I think that we can't ignore that. It's, when you think of, and a lot of people say, well, we want it to be like the Wild Wild West. But in a sense, there is that sort of draw about guns in this country that doesn't exist elsewhere. And especially here in like the Midwest and well, not so much the South, but in the Midwest, I mean, guns are looked upon much differently than in other countries. So while we maybe can learn something from other countries on what can work and what won't, we always have to keep that in mind, that this is a completely different situation.
Yeah. If I may, so Andrew, before I let you speak, I would like to basically be in a position of straightening the arguments, of all of you, if you make a good point, and to maybe see, if I see a potential there to make it even stronger. What Johnny basically said.
Could I also comment on? I just thought of something. What we have found also, if we look at police actions, the training and all that, it's really difficult to train somebody for the actual event of shooting somebody. And we've had plenty of examples where police have completely frozen up, have abandoned their responsibilities. And we can always talk about Uvalde, but that's, that's I'm kind of burned out on that a little bit. But, on my channel, I show plenty of examples where you wonder, what in the hell was the cop thinking doing this? So, the training argument, I look at Kyle as behaving a hell of a lot better than half the cops that I've seen who are supposedly trained. And I think the issue is that you can train, but when that event occurs and you got to use the gun, a lot of it is just pure instinct and kind of who you are. And I don't know if you can really prepare adequately for an event where you have to really save your life.
Okay, so as I said, I will just say a few things on Johnny's points. He was absolutely right. You guys are sitting right next to Mexico, and Mexican cartels, while they don't play that big of a role now in the media, they're absolutely undeniably brutal organizations that simply don't have any scruples from killing people, even at mass. You are, sharing a border with them. You are having these guys, in your country, as of now, and especially, in the border states, in Texas and stuff like that. They sometimes, smuggle drugs, or other, stuff, through the private property of, plenty of people. Sometimes, attack them. So there's the need, definitely for the gun ownership. It's definitely higher than, let's say, in Manhattan. So that's the first thing. And the culture, in the US, you are actually not exceptional, when it comes to gun culture, or let's say favoritism, in the world, you are exceptional when it comes to, let's say, the Western world. Yeah, that is true. But for example, in Arabic countries, there's, plenty, the gun culture is there really strong. The celebratory shootings at weddings and stuff like that. That's one example.
Which my wife has done, by the way.
And one of the reason, why your gun culture is so much different from the rest of the Western world is that when the guns were basically getting, introduced to the public, you were still, your country was untamed wilderness. So you still needed to explore, you needed to push through. And having a gun was a difference between life and death. When guns were introduced, here in Europe, at the same time, we were for the most part, tamed continent, civilized continent. I don't know how to say that, but basically there was well-established governing infrastructure across the whole continent. So for quite a, like 200 years, maybe more, there's simply every single person, like across the United States needed a gun to survive. So that is a reason why your culture is somewhat obsessed with firearms in comparison to others. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just how it is.
Right. Oh, also, I'd like to make one more point. I think a lot of people, they think, well, if we could enact these really strict gun laws, we'll be like Denmark. But actually, there's another country closer to us that has really strict gun laws. It's Mexico. And Mexico is a very violent place. We think of high violence like Chicago. Juarez is, I don't know how people live there. I really don't. So which one will we be? Will we be more like Denmark, or will we be more like Mexico? I have a feeling that we would probably end up more like Mexico than Denmark, but that's me.
Absolutely. Okay.
Dixon,
Andrew?
I want to make sure Dixon gets in here too before I start speaking, because I've got some notes here just to follow up on a few points.
Sure.
I've been listening to what everyone says. I mean, I guess what I would just be, I would have a couple of notes, responses, more like thought questions even. First of all, I find the notion that the United States' gun culture was established, in the late 1700s and through the 1800s as the western part of the country was increasingly settled, and therefore it can never change, to be very dubious. Granted, the United States is land, if I were in 1850 and I were pressing forward into the, interior of places like Colorado and Nevada and places like that, California. Of course, California was already somewhat settled, but that those middle parts, or even earlier than that, like as people are exploring the regions along the Mississippi River after the Louisiana Purchase. Yeah, sure, but the government of this country has been the government of every square inch of it since at least 1900. And, in terms of formalized statehood, that includes Alaska and Hawaii now. And like in the 1950s, there's really no frontier here anymore. And so while there might be a vestigial memory that my great grandpappy, was firing muskets at Indians in the, wooded regions on the west bank of the Mississippi, that's hardly a reason to establish what gun policy ought to be today. I'm not saying that therefore it necessarily follows we should have gun control. I'm saying that that's not a reason not to have it. I feel like I had something else to say, but for the moment, I'll just leave it there.
Okay, let me go ahead and respond to that. I wasn't saying that we couldn't, that we had to be stuck with guns. What I'm saying is that Americans just look at guns differently than other countries. And therefore, a person from Denmark doesn't understand why Americans recoil so much at the thought of gun control, because in Denmark, a gun is not looked upon quite the same as it is in the United States, and it's primarily because we are a frontier pioneer country. It's just, I think that the mystique, the romanticism of the gun is embedded far deeper in our culture than it is elsewhere. That's all I was saying.
Well, and I think I don't totally disagree with that. I mean, certainly my father was a big fan of Westerns, and as a result, I certainly have some favorites, and not of the Clint Eastwood variety either. I like my John Wayne and all of that. And I do understand what you're saying, but again, I just think that, while it might therefore make it more difficult politically, if you're trying to change people's hearts and minds, I could take your point there, but I just would be dubious about any claims that somehow that because of A, we can't do B. You know what I mean? It might be a
I wasn't making that argument.
Okay.
Yeah, if I may just quickly, Sean, before I let you
go
speak.
for it. Go for it.
Just with the culture, that is one thing. Andrew, I need to point out. I have a suspicion, and correct me if I'm wrong. That you basically are looking. You are kind of not understanding. I don't know. Let's say in Texas or in Oklahoma, when some people are walking around, with firearms, like openly. It is part of the culture. I believe, like Johnny, like do you have in Oklahoma some kind of festivals or something like that? Like I don't know, for example, for shooting, like targets, like or something like that, where like a town, like gets together and like shoots for fun, or something like that.
Not that I can think of. No, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think that day to day is much different here than most other states.
Okay.
As far as that goes.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean,
but,
to your point, if I could say something, because you're, I admittedly, I've never lived in Texas or Oklahoma, but I mean, Pennsylvania is a big hunting state. In fact, a mutual friend of ours, Sean and mine from high school, we were both very close with and are still friendly with. He and his father and family, they regularly took hunting trips. I mean, they had the gun case in the living room there. Mike Latini, I'm talking about. Sean, if you're like nodding your head, but
Yeah,
it was like, I mean, I spent all kinds of time around his family, ate venison with them, all of that. So, I mean, it's not isolated to, it's not like if you come to the United States, there are probably a few states, New York, I guess, although New York has huge areas of forested area where hunting happens. So, I mean, I would think maybe a smaller state like New Jersey, maybe there's a little bit less of it, but even the northwestern part of Jersey is heavily forested. And I'm sure there's hunting that goes on there. So
right.
it's not really isolated to just one part of the country, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Andrew, like what I meant by that, and this is common, like I'm not saying this is your position, like I'm not sure. Will explain it, like what I mean. There's plenty of people in US, for example, that when we were talking about Kyle's example, they simply could not have understand how someone could walk around, like in a street with a gun, like openly carrying, like AR-15, despite there being plenty of people. And, I'm just want to make a point that there's no one is like a culture police. You know what I mean? That because, like someone else views, like something else normal, and let's say you don't think that is normal, but that doesn't mean like that you are right on that, like that you are an authority. But again, I don't know if that's your position. Just
well, I mean, to answer, I don't know that it's quite my position. I take your point that I don't live in an area of the country where I'm very likely to see anybody walking around with an AR-15 slung over their shoulder or a handgun, holstered on their except for a police officer. Sure. And so it would shock me a little bit, probably. But you're right. I'm not the culture police. And the question, bottom line is it legal? If it's legal, they can do it. You know what I mean? That's really the situation. I think you're kind of getting with that question to me, what's, the underlying problem with this whole debate. And, no matter which way you slice it, is that, 99.56% of legal gun owners, I mean, some incredibly high percentage of legal gun owners are never going to do anything with their gun that would be illegal. They might not be at the 100% safest all the time. I'm sure there are some who don't do anything criminal, but maybe don't store it properly or things of that nature. But, for the most part, they like to have it. It's something that they identify with. They want to go target shoot with it. They want to do whatever. They want to go hunt it. It doesn't matter. The problem is, and this is always the issue, is how do you handle these things? Are exceptionally dangerous. They are more dangerous than any other consumer product one can buy. That is in terms of like its actual design and purpose. I mean, yes, cigarettes are dangerous. You shouldn't smoke them, but they're not going to kill you like you smoke one and down you fall, right? This is about the only product I can think of whose design and purpose is to kill things, and they're commercially available. And what that means is that it only takes one person, like the guy in Uvalde or like the guy in Sandy Hook, who no gun law that we have yet devised would have stopped either one of those people from purchasing them, as gun rights advocates rightly point out. I mean, they didn't have records, they didn't have things on their in their background that would have prevented by any law you could come up with to stop it. But it can't happen. So how do we stop it?
Yeah, I got you, and I will, straighten your point. We will be taking, some questions from the audience, but I would like to let, Sean talk, for a bit. He wanted, he had some retorts.
Nice. I need you hanging out with me and my wife. That would help. That was a funny joke. So the thing I want to bring up, because we talk about Mexico, and for me, it's difficult to say we shouldn't talk about gun control because of Mexico is on the border and it's a dangerous country. I think that's a lot of, I don't want to say it's a talking point, but there's not a lot of data that really backs up what we're talking about. And I appreciate that Mexico is a dangerous country that borders the United States. But when we talk about gun control, I don't think anybody's ever talked about taking away guns from Americans. And I think when I look at how the Czech Republic or how Switzerland, views guns, they're respecting guns, and anybody who goes through that level of training. So I would expect, Paul, would I be correct to say you have gone through all the protocols and own gun or guns in the Czech Republic?
Sure.
And I think from that, I can surmise based on what I know you've gone through. You have respect for the weapon, you understand it, and I feel fairly comfortable to have you living next door knowing you've gone through those protocols. Now, in let's say Oklahoma, and this isn't a slight, I'm just saying my view, Johnny, on let's say the Oklahoma laws, anybody can just buy a gun. 18, just grab a gun. I want to buy a rifle. I want to get a handgun. And then I want to take it out with me and walk around. Now, I think the way the gun culture in America is now, it's an accessory. It's not a tool. People use it to, Dixon and I did a review on this one guy's video who gave me sort of an eye-opening view on some of the issues with guns. You don't see people with like a drill on their chest and their, trigger finger out holding a drill or a saw. Usually it's like an AR or something or some sort of a rifle, and they're displaying it. And a lot of times it's not respected as a tool. It's an accessory. It's something to make you feel like a man. And when, for me, I would respect a gun owner who goes through those protocols, who educates themselves, who wants to make sure that they're safe, not only for them, but for the people around them. And I don't understand why we start talking about Mexico when we want to bring up, let's make gun owners more educated. Let's make sure people who have guns have gone through those protocols. And I don't understand why there's resistance in that conversation. And maybe that's something you can enlighten me to. Maybe there is no resistance. Maybe we all agree on the same thing.
Well, my question would be is, what exactly are we trying to solve? For example, school shooters, mass shootings, armed robbers, they don't need the gun training. They know how to use them. And so we're not going to solve that problem. The other one is that you're talking about requiring the gun training, but the people who are responsible for the vast majority of the heartbreak in this country are not going to go through that training anyway. 400 million guns in this country means that there's access. So the problem with the training is now you're discouraging somebody who really needs a gun because something's traumatic has happened, needs protection. And invariably, these gun training programs end up being long, drawn out, expensive ordeals. And the person is not going to be able to meet that. What do you want? Restraining order? Restraining order just tells your attacker where you're living. That's pretty much all it does. So a person out there who is in genuine fear, these training programs are not going to help the situation. In reality, I have a five-shot J-frame. Not a lot of training involved. You aim it, you pull the trigger. What else do you need? I mean, so here, one more point. These training programs are really, in my opinion, are just really aimed at just making it tougher and tougher for people to get firearms. There are barriers put up in front. Now they're wanting insurance. They're wanting to put people, well, you have to pay for insurance as well. San Jose passed a resolution where they're going to require all gun owners to carry liability insurance. It's not working out very well for them, but okay. So again, I kind of wonder if these training programs are not just designed as barriers to prevent people from being able to obtain firearms when they need them.
So can I ask you a question about sort of the state of play as far as what is working now in your view? Is one of the things that bothers me is in the if I were to compare United Kingdom and Czech Republic, because I think relatively speaking, the state of play with homicide is very similar, even with gun homicide. In the UK, about they have something like trying to think of what it was. Their homicide rate is about, I want to say, a fifth of what it is in the US, and 4% of their homicides are via guns. Now in the US, you have, I think, something like 20,000 homicides, and of those 20,000 homicides, 80% of them are gun related. And there's a statistical problem. There is the homicide rate in the US is that of a third world country right now, or relative to that. And I see a problem. And when we talk about, guns and talk about educating people on guns, I don't understand why that's something we can't begin to explore. Why is it just off the table because we think it's not going to work, or we think it's going to?
Nobody disagrees. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Paul.
May I take this one? The problem, that you face in US is that the gun owners, they simply don't trust you, meaning, your side, let's say, that they will not be pushing for further restrictions. Basically, they're afraid that if they let you have the foot in the door, you will push the door, wide open to, eventually ban guns. And you might not think so because, first of all, well, you view yourself, as reasonable, and that it's not something that you would want. Well, they don't see into your head. They don't trust you, let's say you specifically. That's one thing. The other, can you guarantee that everyone, on let's say that is in power right now or will come later will have the same, position as you? And, just this is a very legitimate fear, because in the EU, that is precisely what is happening. After some terrorist attacks.
Can I say something there, though, Paul? And I'm sure I didn't interrupt. I don't think it is a legitimate fear that someone's going to, quote unquote, take your guns away. And the reason is, the United States Constitution is clear and unequivocal that in order to maintain a militia, I forget the exact wording at the front end of it, but the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And you are not going to overturning a constitutional amendment. I don't know that if and Paul, I don't know how much you know about U.S. civics, but it is an enormously heavy lift. You need a 2/3 majority of both the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate, and then it's sent to the states, and you need a supermajority of them to ratify it. So you need 37 state legislatures in there. Maybe it's only, I don't know if it has to go through a bicameral process in states that have bicameral legislatures like this one does. Some of the states, I think like the Virginia only has an assembly. But regardless, you have to, there's just no way. Speaking of the gun culture, and to Johnny Walker Dread's earlier point, there is not enough political will in this country, nor will there ever be, to overturn the Second Amendment. It is simply not on the table. That is something that I can say unequivocally is not on the table today, not tomorrow, and not ever.
Okay. But in that response, as a law-abiding citizen, can you possess a firearm in Chicago? As a law-abiding citizen, can you possess a firearm in New York?
Yes.
And it goes,
Yes and yes.
Dude. That is close to impossible, as far as I know. And correct me if I'm wrong.
You're listening to some propaganda on that. Is it more difficult in New York and Chicago than it is in Oklahoma? No doubt. But it is absolutely possible to do.
Okay, then I ask, Johnny Walker Dread, could you, I don't know, back me up, or, basically come with the data?
Okay, so one of the things that we have to be obviously, the Second Amendment is there, of course. However, a lot of people are interpreting it, and the Supreme Court not recently, but within recent times has interpreted it correctly. I'm not sure that will hold up forever. But here's the example. In San Jose, for example, you cannot have a gun without buying liability insurance, a clear infringement on the Second Amendment, but they did it anyway. So in California, for example,
that raises an interesting point about you get down to the word infringe and what does it mean? Because I think I go back to my earlier question, the one that I asked my father. should your next door neighbor be able to have a nuclear weapon? Because technically, if you're going to read infringe absolutely tightly, that would be an infringement on his right to bear arms. But I don't think any reasonable, rational person wants their next door neighbor or any other private citizen that they don't know exactly who they are and exactly what they're doing to have a nuke. But a nuclear weapon meets the definition of an arm. And if I say you can't have it, I have indeed infringed.
Okay, so now what we have said is that we have a Second Amendment, but we can interpret it to essentially admit any kind of gun law that we want. For example, in Alameda County, California is a state where if you apply for a concealed carry, each county sheriff is responsible for approving the actual permits. In Alameda County, I think they approved like 10. And it was all probably for their, politician friends or whatever. So, and that is an infringement. So, at one point, it seems as if we use that nuclear arms argument, we can pretty much suppress any kind of activity.
Well, and my point is, and I take your point there. I'm not a big fan of slippery slope arguments, Sean. I think you and I have spoken.
I don't like the slippery slope. I don't like talking.
I use it though.
I give an example.
The nuclear weapon simply because what we need to do is acknowledge that there is a principle. There is a limit to what you want an individual private citizen to hold, and it has to do with its constructive power, right? I mean, you just can't have anybody. Elon Musk might be a darling of the right for the moment, but I'm sure he was not until recently. And I sure as hell don't want someone like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, because you think to yourself, well, nuclear weapons are expensive. It takes that kind of wealth to own one. But there are people indeed who are rich enough that they could if they wanted. And I'm not comfortable with people who have no attachment to anything other than themselves and their own money owning that kind of weaponry. And I don't know that there's any, I mean, maybe I should ask you before going forward. Do you think that should be permitted? I mean, are you that committed to the notion that if you can afford a nuke and you want to keep one on your property, you should be allowed to have it?
Yeah, I think that a nuclear weapon is actually classified as an explosive device. So it would be covered under grenades and things like that. When you say bear arms, I think the implication there is something that is meant for an individual, to actually carry. But I'm not a constitutional scholar.
I appreciate that, but I'm going to say right there that you are yourself interpreting the amendment as I am. You know what I mean? So the point is that
I think that's actually
there's no such thing as everybody's got to interpret it. Interpretation is the name of the game. I mean, there's just no way around that. No matter which side you're on or which side, who you're arguing for, there's going to be some degree of interpretation. By the way, as an English professor, I will say what drives me nuts about the Second Amendment is the comma splices. It is horrible. Comma splices all throughout it. It is awful.
Yeah, well, I've taught English too, but I think that back in that time, those grammatical rules were a little different. I see a lot of that kind of structure in some of those older documents.
Maybe so, but it drives me nuts today.
Guys, if I may, first, Andrew, I don't see, basically nuclear weapons, and firearms, on the same level, not only when it comes to destructive power, but, just even, the radiation and stuff like that. You're talking, that's a completely different ballpark, in my mind. I don't want to go into that, we are more than willing to discuss it, some other time. But, you are focused way too much on just a straight out bans of firearms, what I mean, as being the problem. But, for example, I know you are arguing for limiting the magazine size, and that is, that I've seen on your live stream, that you were saying that if you don't basically if the gunfight is not done by 5 or 10 rounds, I forgot, then you are probably dead at that point. Well, the issue is that gunfights, in self-defense and stuff like that, they are very chaotic and very, very often people simply miss. Another thing is that limiting, the magazine size, you will be punishing only law-abiding people, not the criminals, because there's so many magazines already in circulation that ship has basically sailed. You know what I mean? And third one is that, for example, when it comes to mass shooters and stuff like that, the limiting of the magazine size won't hinder them that much. You know, because if you want, I can show you, like the videos and stuff like that. You can change magazine on AR-15, like in a second or two.
1 second, yeah.
Like that. And it's simply the reason why there's a difference is because a mass shooter will not be basically pressed, like by fire going his direction, where a law-abiding like a citizen who is fighting for his life, for example, in having a gunfight with someone, that person will have insane adrenaline dump. Like his hands will be shaking, he will be afraid for his life, and to change in that situation a magazine is very difficult, sometimes close to impossible. So basically your solution, and that is what is being pushed by government, again, even here, they are pushing more and more, and stupidly, I can go into examples, like why it is completely unreasonable what the EU is doing, but it would disproportionately punish or affect those law-abiding citizens while not hinder, for example, mass shooters or criminals, basically at all.
I'll let other folks talk, and I understand that point. It's one that my father used to make, and I do get it to a certain degree, that, if you're going to break the law by shooting people in the first place, then breaking the law by minor gun violations is, small potatoes. I understand the logic there. What I would say, just in response to what you just said, Paul, is that you kind of said, like, well, if I'm someone who is a good guy and now I've been limited, so I can only have 5 rounds or 10 rounds, let's say, in my AR-15 magazine, I'm just making something up. Now I'm limited, and if I need to reload, I'm so filled with adrenaline, I'm going to be shaking and I'm going to have a hard time reloading. How is that not true of the person who showed up to also fire a bunch of guns? You know what I mean? Like, there's still an adrenaline rush, even for the people who are the bad guys, who are there to shoot. The fact that they have to stop and reload does present an opportunity for law enforcement, for anyone to get in there and stop them, even if it's only for a second or two. And maybe they're going to suffer from the adrenaline rush, and they're going to have trouble reloading. Anytime there's a moment to reload, it's a moment for something to go wrong with the reloading, and that's the moment for the shooting to stop, I would argue.
Yeah, I would argue also, though, on the other flip side, I don't know of any of these shootings that would have even done anything. My question is that what is the problem you're trying to stop? And ultimately, these guys, and by the way, the mindset of a person going in purposely and finding targets and shooting people is much different than a person fighting for his life. And I don't think that reloading would have been an issue at all for any of these people that have been doing this. So I just don't see how, putting in this magazine limits does anything. A person's not going to stop somebody from wanting to go out and shoot kids. I mean, we all agree with that, I think. That 1 or 2 seconds, I don't know of any of these shootings where that would have mattered.
Yeah, and Village Sean, speak. I just want to quickly clarify, Andrew. I absolutely acknowledge that it hinders, let's say a mass shooter too. I'm saying it hinders a law-abiding citizen far more than the mass shooter. So, Sean, if you have some points.
By the way, I would like to discuss a little bit the slippery slope thing, and I know that you don't like it,
John,
but it's real. Yes, it can be used as a fallacy, but it's a very real thing. Yeah,
we will get to that. We will get to that. Like Sean, if you would like to say something.
No, that's okay. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, slippery slope, because I'm just gonna. The only thing I'll respond to that before I go to my other point is we make lines in the sand all the time in every law in every way, and slippery slope, I think, is a way to say I'm in a way, not that I'm afraid of change, but we evolve as a society, and if we draw lines in the sand, then as we learn more, we're limiting ourselves to evolve our laws. And that's when the Constitution was written, it was explicitly written with a system of amendments so we can evolve as we grow. And I'd argue that the founding fathers, when they created the Constitution, and it has changed, those amendments are there to evolve with where we've gone, even now with guns in production. There's 400 million guns out there, and you know, they were aware that things were going to evolve and the laws would need to evolve with people in time. And I can understand that's what scares gun owners. You know, it's you know, in America, it's part of identity. It's not just a tool. It's ingrained in who you are as society. You know, when you go back to you know, I think you would refer to them as you know, the pioneers. You know, the gun is very central to American culture, and also I think in the Czech Republic, especially in Eastern Europe. I mean, you know, following the Soviet Union, guns, especially in Ukraine, I'm pretty damn well sure that those people are glad that some of them are armed over there. You know, there's good examples in modern society of countries invading, where if I lived in the Ukraine, yeah, of course you'd want a gun. I get that. I get all that. But I think, you know, when we look at the U.S., what I'm not hearing, though, we end up going down all these rabbit holes. And it's almost like there's this murder rate that's, you know, in America right now. It's something like 50 per million, whereas in the UK and in the Czech Republic, just as examples here, we're looking at 0.5. And I think what I struggle with, I need to double check that stat, but it's something like 5 times different. To me, that is a problem that needs to be addressed. That's a problem that we're just saying, okay, we need to protect the guns, but let's ignore the stupidly high homicide rate in the United States. And I guess my question, Johnny, is what do you think can be done, or do you think anything should be done to address that? Or is America just inherently a dangerous place to live, and that's the price of having guns?
I think that, well, the U.S. is inherently a dangerous place to live in certain areas of the country. Okay. Yeah. You know, I don't live in an area where that's an issue, but on the one point you made about the slippery slope, we draw our lines in the sand often because we know we're going to move them later. And I worked with city planners. I know how this works. I mean, it's very real effective knowing that if we can actually get this part in, then raising it is relatively easy. So we have a very modest insurance policy. It doesn't cost very much now, but now that we have the insurance requirement, raising the rates is trivial. So that's how that slippery slope works. And it's a very real effect. It is not, in this case, it's not a fallacy. It can be used as one, but in this case, it's something that gun owners do worry about. The foot in the door thing. And when they always pass some rule, some new law, it's always the same. Well, it's a nice start. Start? I thought that this is what you were wanting. No, it's just the start. So
should I be worried about, I just want to ask a question. I don't mean to jump in. Should I be worried about hand grenades being made legal because semi-automatic and automatic weapons are legal in some places? Therefore, the slippery slope argument dictates that we may see people blowing shit up soon legally. I'm worried. We're going to see the slippery slope works both ways. We do have to make a distinction one way or the other.
Right. But I would suggest that you're worried about the slippery slope just as much as I am.
No,
however, why? Well, I mean, you basically just espoused it.
No. I'm using that as an example. I'm not actually worried.
But you applied it, right? You actually are making an argument.
No, because democracy. I mean, we vote on shit for that reason. Mm-hmm. You know, that's why if let's say 70% of the country wants to limit Americans to one handgun, and it goes through Congress and the House and gets the 2/3 vote, then that is democracy, and that is it. That, you know, that's how the government was set up. That's what we would expect. That's not going to happen.
The Bill of Rights was devised to prevent that kind of, what I would say, mob rule. Let me give you an example. Fourth Amendment. We could save a lot of lives if we allowed police to basically bust indoors anytime they wanted. And it doesn't matter whether the public wants that or not. The Bill of Rights is designed to prevent public popularity from dictating what our laws are. So the Second Amendment is not really open for, let's say, public a popularity contest.
Well, I would say one thing to that. I agree that the Johnny, that I'm calling you Johnny like it's your real name. It just feels funny, but
that's what everybody calls me.
I agree that the Bill of Rights is set up to protect the rights of a minority. And to Sean's point, for example, you know, like if 50% plus one of Californians wanted to say, let's round up every Irish person and, you know,
put them on a boat to China, they can't do that. You know what I mean? Like, or even 60%, right? I mean, like that is indeed some of the protections that are baked into the government, the way it's been set up. But I would stop short of saying it's to absolutely prevent. It's to make it, it's a heavy lift. That's what it is. It's very difficult. And as I said earlier, I don't foresee the Second Amendment ever being fully repealed because of the heaviness of that lift. But if the political will were there, it certainly could be done. You know what I mean? Like the prohibition was both enacted and repealed. You know, I mean, like it can happen.
If I
I
may,
agree
you know,
with
like cool. If I may, like jump on that, the issue, you know, like with the distrust, you know, like the point, you know, you basically said it is not a valid point, and we can, you know, like talk about it, you know, like a bit more, you know, like the slippery slope, you know, Andrew. But the, you know, like fact remains that you know, in order to basically enact any real gun control change, you need a support of quite a lot of the gun owners. Well, the gun owners don't trust you. That's a fact. Therefore, you need
right.
to.
So I don't know if I was misunderstood. I'm not saying that you can just go ahead and. I'm not trying to suggest that you don't need support. You do need support. I'm saying that you know what Sean was saying, that indeed there is an ability. There is. It's very difficult to the vanishing point that it probably won't happen, but you could theoretically. Repeal the Second Amendment, for example.
Right, but the reason why they made the process so strenuous was that they figured that anything that would be able to pass through all of those checks would be a good thing. They certainly did not want to devote it to where, well, if 50% of the public wants to limit the Fourth Amendment, well, what can you do? I mean, that's what the public wants.
No, I think that's right. Yeah.
Right. Anyway, if I may, you know, like get back to that. In the end, you need support, you know, like of those gun owners, and you're gonna need to compromise. You know, as I said, you know, like they don't trust you. So, one of the things, you know, that I see a problem, and what I said, you know, like is a valid point, is that plenty of people are trying to force this federally, and where I understand your points that why you want that, because you are one country, you don't have a border check. So for example, let's say you live in Pennsylvania, and let's say you are happy with your gun laws, well, someone can, you know, like travel out of the state, buy a gun somewhere else where you are like where voters in Pennsylvania are like, we don't want those gun laws, and import those guns, you know, like into Pennsylvania. I fully understand that, you know, like view. You know, on the other hand, you also need to understand that people have different values, you know, like different choices and stuff like that, you know, and it is in that decision in each and individual state. The same here, you know, like in like in Europe. We in Czech Republic are more than happy with our gun regulations, you know, but EU is coming from the outside and forcing theirs on us, and we are fighting to the tooth and nail to basically, and so far, you know, like somewhat winning, you know, to basically negate that. But I don't mind if in France, for example, they banned all firearms. That's their stuff, you know. So the issue, you know, like, or one of the compromises, you know, like, if I may suggest, would be, and I just want to suggest it to you guys, you know, what would you think about that? That, let's say you figure that basically, if you would have a person, again, from, let's say, Pennsylvania, going to Texas to buy a firearm, that he would need to then basically follow the Pennsylvanian basically regulations and stuff like that, you know, that unless he would obviously move. I'm not talking about, you know, like someone who moves to Texas, for example, permanently, but who just goes to Texas to buy a firearm and then basically drive back. That, you know, like the Texas gun shop would be like, yeah, mate, you're from Pennsylvania, we need to follow all these things, you know, because you are a Pennsylvanian.
Unconstitutional,
Yeah, is it completely? Well, then,
yeah,
and
it's unconstitutional. A visitor to your state is entitled to all the rights of anybody else that's living in the state.
Yeah, and if I may, you know, like that is, well, at least to me, that would be a reasonable compromise, even though it is unconstitutional. Maybe you could, you know, like have a discussion on it. Yeah, maybe we could, you know, like tweak the constitution a bit there, because as of now, you know, like that is. Well, I would view that as reasonable. Just saying.
It's not unreasonable as a concept. The problem is that there's no, as we've kind of discussed, there's no tweaking the Constitution. You either amend it or you don't, because of the difficulty of changing it, which was, as Johnny pointed out, was by design. I will say that, Johnny, I think, asked the right question earlier, which is, what are we trying to prevent? And I think we know all inherently what we're trying to prevent, because I don't know anybody, and I assume Johnny's, I think you said this yourself earlier, that we're all in agreement that nobody wants somebody walking into an elementary school or Virginia Tech or Columbine High School, or, we could list them up. Schools are especially egregious because there's a sense of, students who are young lives, innocent lives, but really it doesn't matter. I mean, the guy walked in the movie theater in Colorado. Nobody wants this. Nobody wants a world where somebody walks into a crowded place, the Las Vegas concert, right, and starts just firing away. And, I know that sometimes gun advocates, and I hope, Johnny, you'll understand why this upsets people on our side, when people will say, well, the answer is like arm the teachers. Well, we kind of have talked about why that today in this conversation, why on the surface, that could sound like a great idea, perhaps, like, oh, good guys with guns will stop bad guys with guns. But first of all, I mean, you yourself said training isn't always the answer. It comes down to the person, the moment, et cetera, et cetera. And second of all, I mean, when you start getting chaotic and bullets start flying back and forth, the more bullets flying back and forth from more angles, maybe you stop the guy earlier, or maybe there's 3 or 4 extra casualties that didn't have to happen. I mean, there's all kinds of questions like that. And what about me? I have rights too, in the sense that I don't think I should have to feel like, in order to be a teacher, I also need to be a firearms expert. I don't think those two things have to go together. You know what I mean? And I don't think they should. So the question is, and I think we all agree, I don't think there's anybody, correct me if I'm wrong, among the three of us, and probably in the whole country, this is what we want to stop. We wouldn't have these conversations if these things didn't happen. If it were, and I don't mean to brush under the carpet or put aside Sean's broader point, which is also, I think, valid about just the sheer number of homicides in this country, which is alarming. And I don't think, Sean, you even brought up the number of suicides by gun in this country, it's also a conversation we could have. But narrowing the focus here for the purposes of this conversation, the reason why these gun control conversations come up is because of these events, these sentinel events, where some individual actor with a axe to grind or whatever, and a screw loose, has legally or illegally acquired, a significant amount of firearms and is able to take out all kinds of people. And I think maybe the Las Vegas shooting is the most interesting one to consider if you're going to think about it hypothetically, because there was no good guy with a gun that was going to stop that. He sealed himself in a hotel room and he shot until the good guys showed up, and then he took his own life. And so he killed 55 people or whatever it was, in the time that he had. Nobody wants that. How do we stop it?
Okay, so by the way, in terms of these mass shootings, especially by younger people, one of my streams recently described what the problems were and how to fix them.
I watched this.
In other words, how can we actually diminish the number of shootings down to where they're exceptionally rare? But the society is not going to want to implement those things. So, in my opinion, I think that we're stuck in this.
Before you blow it over, what was it what did the students suggest? I'm curious.
My suggestion is that there is something fundamentally flawed in the way that we are raising kids.
And his broadband is
acting what up. A good
Johnny, your internet was acting up, like you froze, so
at the exact wrong time.
Moment. You're like, my opinion is that
hold it. I got everybody laughing, but I don't know what the issue is. What's
your
going on?
Internet gave up, you froze, you know what I mean? So
we didn't hear it. Maybe I should turn off my video.
No, it was the only time.
It was the only time it went out.
Okay, so ultimately the issue is that we have raised a generation of kids who not only have no perspective and have been raised to believe that whatever problems they have are a result of society, but also have no impulse control. And you combine those two together, and you have kids now who, when they are having severe issues, the consciousness of shooting up a school rises to the point where they're actually carrying this thing out. We've always had guns in this country. When I was a kid, we had more access to guns than we do now. We never thought of doing something like this. Why are kids therefore doing it? It's because of what we've been doing to these kids for the last 2 generations. So the way to stop these shootings from happening, or at least to make them where they're extraordinarily rare, is to, one, change our curriculum to where they understand that what they have available to them is actually a very good thing. They have been raised to believe that the world is horrible, your life is terrible, and it's somebody else's fault. The other one is we need to really reinforce to kids that, just because something feels good, you just can't go and do it. But our parents nowadays are exhibiting exactly this lack of impulse control that are teaching their kids that worry about the consequences later. And we saw it in the Buffalo shooter, where he's in his car and he says, no, I'm going to do it. And he drives up. He knew that if he waited a little bit longer, he would talk himself out of it. And there's a perfect example of a lack of impulse control. However, that's going to take a long time.
Well,
and it's going to be required. One last point.
I want to jump in before you, Dixon, if that's all right. Continue, Johnny.
It's going to require that we change up our entire approach towards raising kids. And there's a lot of social-cultural barriers to that. Frankly, I think that the way that these school shootings stop is we go through a long lull, and kids are no longer thinking about doing this kind of stuff. I don't think any of the solutions by gun proponents, by gun controllers, are going to have any effect on this. We're going to have to ride this one out, and I hate to say it, but I don't think that envisioning in my mind some fanciful solution is going to help at all. Go ahead.
Dixon, I hope you don't mind me jumping in. I just, I wanted to participate too today. I wanted a chance. John, I watched that stream actually. Because I had a feeling, your whole thing on mass shootings and impulse control. And I think when we talk about, let's say the homicide issue in this country, or in the when I say this country, I'm referring to my home country. When we're sort of kind of not flippant's the right word. I don't think that's respectful to kind of what you're saying, but when we're kind of flippant about asking people to go through an education protocol, learning to respect a weapon, making it something that you have to earn, through education, and then saying, well, I can't be bothered to do that. That kind of goes down to impulse control. You need a gun this very second for what is a statistically insignificant level of danger you're in at home. For waiting a week, 2 weeks, whatever, to be able, or months, or whatever the case may be, especially given that the data around the world is comprehensive, that going through those education protocols, similar to if you wanted to fly a plane or drive a car, make a massive difference to people's safety. And the thing I struggle with is we're saying, if 24,000 people a year, well, I'm not even going to throw in the suicides, because in America we really don't give a shit about suicides. I mean, let's be honest, we don't care. And if we just talk about the 24,000 people that are being killed, the Second Amendment right now is trumping that whole life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. My wife, when she goes to the States, there's a part of her that's like, yeah, I could see or hear somebody get shot, and here she has no fear about that. And I just feel like, and I think that's why is this conversation about what we can do? Why is teaching people how to respect and use guns, why is that like a fanciful solution? What would you suggest we do, if anything, to limit the number of homicides? Because if you talk about, one last thing I want to say, if we talk about students and young people and impulse control, we don't have this problem in any other country. We don't have, kids are the same all over the world, and we don't have these same issues in any other country. These mass shootings aren't happening anywhere else. And I appreciate there's an access issue with guns, but it just seems like the conversation is, well, fuck it. There's going to be a lot of people that die. I want anybody to be able to have a gun. There's no in between. There's no nuance. There's no context in that conversation.
Okay. Well, first of all, if we're going to talk about these solutions, they have to be real solutions. The solutions that I hear are not going to solve this problem.
So why don't you think that educating people, making sure people that are owning guns are checked, don't have any mental health issues, understand how to use a gun? Why is that a problem?
Because the people that are carrying out the killings and stuff would not have gone through that. The other thing is that one of my solutions was every kid in the country, military junior ROTC training in high school.
So you agree with Switzerland then? You like Switzerland's gun control laws?
Well, keep in mind, Switzerland has access issues, that I don't agree with. But in terms of having every kid go through military junior ROTC training, it's not about firearms. It's about the discipline that comes out of it. You don't see kids who went through junior ROTC having too many of these problems. And it's not about how to handle a gun. The person who pulls out a gun and shoots the liquor store owner knows how to use it. He respects his gun fine. He knows exactly what it's for. So teaching him to respect the gun, teaching him how to use it, he's already passed those qualifications. But what the junior ROTC training is designed to do is to instill self-discipline and perspective into kids that will kind of bleed out this notion somehow that your life is so horrible and the people in that school need to pay for it. That is really the real primal cause of all of these shootings. If we're going to solve that problem, we have to go after it. Like I say, you're right. You don't have school shootings in like England,
anywhere,
and Czechoslovakia. We didn't have them either here.
Yeah, but there was only 148 million. When you were in school, too, there was only 148 million guns. Sorry, I don't mean to be talking over everybody.
No, that's
there was only about 100. Like, let's say you're maybe similar, or maybe a little bit older. I don't know, but it was about 140 to 180 million guns. Let's say 25 years ago. Now there's 400 million guns.
Right.
So when we start looking at impulse control as maybe a causal effect as to why there's gun violence.
Okay, so
more guns are going to be creating issues as well.
Gun ownership rates are about the same, and if anything, maybe a little lower. The difference in the number of guns is that there are more collectors. For example, people like me, and I have so many guns, I don't even know how many I have. But people like me were relatively rare back in the 70s. We're not the ones shooting up schools. So the number of guns has risen up astronomically, but it's primarily by hoarding from a very select number of people who themselves are not a part of the problem.
So can I, because I want to jump in on that because before I forget, because I'm getting old and dementia.
Yeah,
so I get this streaming in the next couple hours, I'm going to be fine. So let's say we just say, Johnny, screw your ideas on, bad guys with guns are always going to be bad guys. We shouldn't educate any good guys. You think, so if we went through that protocol, we just said, screw what Johnny Walker thinks. You don't think that's going to make any statistical difference whatsoever in the amount of gun violence or homicides in the country? Because that's kind of what you have to say. You have to say that it's going to make no difference whatsoever for me to say that's a good idea.
Requiring a training of people buying a gun and let's say certification or whatever else will have no statistical effect on the number of, let's say, homicides. Although we could say no statistically significant effect. If there's effect, it might be very small.
Guys, if I may, you're getting a bit confused here because one is jumping to homicides, and the other is talking about mass shootings, school shootings and stuff like that. So, keep it, one and one, what I mean? So I'm not jumping in because I think this conversation is just now pure gold, so yeah.
I'm enjoying myself, by the way.
Yeah, this is fun. Can I jump in though, because I want to pick up on this point, and I think it's an interesting sort of one that I ran for the Pennsylvania State House of Representatives. I mentioned that on my channel with Sean there. Maybe you heard that before, Johnny. And this is a tricky issue in Pennsylvania because I first of all, to be clear, I am not for. It would be ridiculous to be for trying to seize people's guns because you can't do it. It's illegal. And I'm not for that anyway, because as I've said, 99 point whatever percent of people who own guns, especially legally, they're, as you just said, they're not like people who collect guns are not really the people who are walking into schools shooting up the place, right? So I mean, it's like, there isn't a one-to-one simple relationship there. But to Sean's point, and this is something I did say to some folks, and it was just something I was really using as a trial balloon, because I've thought this is an interesting idea in my mind, and I'd like to hear what someone who on your side of the aisle thinks of it. So, and I think I said this on my channel. If you with Sean, if you watched, maybe you heard me say this before. So I apologize if it's repetitive. But to Sean's point, like let's say you did require training, just for the sake of argument, and I understand why your concerns about it. But just let's say you did, because while the guns that were acquired for a lot of these shootings, these mass shootings that we've been talking about, would not have. The acquisition would not have been stopped by current gun laws. I think they would have fallen under this umbrella. If there were required training, the thought I've always had is, and so I could, well, I'm not on video. I would turn my monitor if I were on video. I have an old computer set up here. My geek hobby is old computers. I have a Commodore sitting over here behind me. And I don't care what collector world or universe you're in, what hobby you're into. You start finding like-minded people, right? If you're into old computers, you find other old computer geeks. If you're into baseball cards, you find other baseball card geeks. And once you get into that community, everybody in that community meets the person who's a little off, the person who is a little too into the hobby, the person who scares you a little bit. They just are just too much into this. I don't care what it is. And obviously with guns, it's extra frightening because you got to worry about that person, because what's that person going to do with this stockpile of weaponry they've developed? And I would refer back to the Las Vegas shooting. And, Johnny, one thing I do disagree with, I mean, you seem to be sort of implying that school curriculums that highlight historic injustices are somehow responsible for school shootings. Well, let me just take a look at Stephen Paddock, who's responsible for the deadliest mass shooting in United States history. He was 64. He didn't go through that curriculum. So, I don't know that that's a one-to-one relationship either. But if he had been required to go through a training every time he bought a new firearm, what would have happened? I agree. It wouldn't have stopped him from wanting to do what he did, but he would have met a whole lot of people, more people who might have been more aware of who he was and maybe got a sense of what he was thinking about. And maybe somebody would have been tipped off before he could have done it.
Yeah.
There's nothing they could have done about it. I mean, if Stephen Paddock was in amongst my circle and I thought, dude, man, this guy is a little screwy.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got, what am I going to do? I can call the FBI and they're going to say, no probable cause for anything. We can't touch it.
But don't you talk to somebody? Maybe you talk to him. Maybe you ask him, gee, like somebody gets to be close with him. Like, maybe you need some help. Have maybe somebody just because I don't know what was going through Stephen Paddock's mind. What I wonder is if he'd had a friend or something to live for, if he would have bothered doing what he did.
Well, one of the things is that the Las Vegas shooting is an anomaly in almost every respect. So it's kind of hard to kind of go back to that one on preventing mass shootings, because nothing he did really followed any kind of pattern of what we associate with mass shootings. He didn't seem to have any sort of like manifesto. He didn't tell anybody anything. He's a lot older than everybody else that's done this. Yeah. So it's really difficult. I mean,
my point is like having those trainings just makes people aware, because like a lot of these folks, I don't care if it's Stephen Paddock or Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris and who did Columbine, or I'm sorry, I don't remember the names of some of these folks. Actually, no, I'm not sorry, I don't remember them. That's part of what I think they're looking for, especially the kids, is notoriety. And I think one thing that we could ask the media is, don't give their names out when they do these things. Don't let them have that satisfaction. I think they're after that, partially. You disagree? You don't think that they're like, they don't want?
No, I went over that on my stream. My feeling about it is, and of course, again, one thing that's really important to always remember is, no matter what you come up with, it's never going to fit every one of these shootings. There's always going to be an anomaly. But mostly, I think that these people are trying to just take out revenge on society and trying to impart emotional trauma into those around them as a way of getting even for whatever thing that they is bothering them.
Right.
I don't think they're in it for personal notoriety.
Well, no. I mean, yeah, I do think that there is an element of that with some of the kids, not the older people, not Stephen Paddock. But my broader point was that they're all disaffected for one reason or another. They all have the trauma that you're speaking of. They all, and people who have family that they care about, people they care about, lives that they care about, those people don't do these things. And so the more you can get somebody plugged into a world around them that they care about and less isolated, the fewer of them that they're going to be. I would just reason, And so therefore, I think that the training could really act, if nothing else, as like if let's say you have somebody who's given to being a loner, who becomes obsessed with collecting firearms and maybe is inclined, has some grievances, and is the sort of person who could snap one day and go and fire. And maybe they're like, the video that Sean, I think, was referring to when he was talking about gun culture. There's a very clever gentleman, I'm sorry, I don't know his name, who talked about a lot of people will say, well, that kid should have been disciplined more. Well, he's like, well, what do you mean by that? You mean he should have been smacked around more? Because a lot of people, that's what they mean by discipline. But now you've got a kid who's already somebody who feels picked on and bullied. And you're suggesting that maybe if he'd been hit more, he'd be less inclined to feel vengeance. That's not.
I don't think anybody supports that.
Right. Well, I mean, but what this guy is saying is that, the personality type, we could all profile it. We all know who this person is to a degree, that there's somebody who just feels like they don't belong for one reason or another. They feel angry at society because they feel like they don't belong for one reason or another. If you give them something to belong to, how is that a bad thing? And the training could be a vehicle for meeting other people, developing relationships, feeling like they're connected to something instead of feeling isolated, alone, and ready to blow.
Well, let me ask you a question, though. That's something that intrigues me. With Stephen Paddock, you mentioned that if he had to go through the training for each gun he bought, if he's already gone through the training, he's trained.
Yeah. No, you're touche. I was talking sort of off the top of my head.
Here's the thing, though. But this is real. In some, I think it was in California, and I could be wrong about this. I haven't lived in there in a long time. You do require a training for each gun when it comes to CCW, even though you've been trained in CCW for your 38. Now you go and you buy a 9mm. You got to go through the training again. And we now know, I mean, in California, the purpose of that. If you're trained in CCW, it shouldn't matter how many guns you have. You're only going to carry one.
But what I'm suggesting is, what if
I'm worried about.
The training is not the training as training, but instead of you're buying a lot of guns. Let's pull you out of the dark and at least have you come talk to people and get to know people. And first of all, maybe somebody will reach you, and maybe you'll not be isolated, but at least maybe, because my point when I talk to people was everybody knows somebody in that hobby. I started with the generic hobby, pick any hobby you like, who's a little bit too into it. And those are the people best positioned both to know who that person is and tell somebody if there's something to be told, but also to maybe reach that person and get them to not be quite so isolated. I don't see a downside to that. You know what I mean? Because you don't want an isolated, angry person with a stockpile of weapons just sitting at home alone boiling.
I think that the downside of it is that, kind of, I wouldn't say forced socialization, but compelled, okay, for maybe a lack of a better word. In California, for example, you have, I was wanting to get a CCW. I said, forget it. It's a year. And so all of these programs that you're talking about are going to end up being dragged out. And I don't really even see where, I'm not as optimistic about you as you are about the effectiveness of what you're talking about. I just don't see that as being really effective. Again, I think we're looking at this thing from two different perspectives.
Yeah. Okay.
But
sorry, Paul, go ahead.
I will study you a bit, and I wanted to go a few things about Sean's points before. one of the things that is constantly said in the US is that such massacres, like and stuff like that, the mass shootings, happen only in the US, but you are often forgetting that it's not the only variable, the guns, the accessibility to it, the amount of it in the US that is different from the rest of the Western world. You are also the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a universal healthcare. You know what I mean? And that goes with mental health care as well. So that is a big part of it too. So, which I find it what is the issue is that, as I said before, the gun owners don't trust you, and especially if people go only after guns, and they don't talk, also in association with dudes, we should probably do something about healthcare, and stuff like that, basically, because in the end, guys, you might not like it because this is basically used as a propaganda. The only thing to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. That's basically true for the most part. The issue is that what you want to achieve is that the bad guy, that you filter those bad guys out, so they don't have the guns in the first place. Because, that, it's a reactive solution, and, you won't change, anything. So I would like to study maybe a bit this direction now.
Yeah, I was reading about this because we talk about mental health, and we talk about identifying those people. I think kind of dovetailing what I was saying and talking about sort of the mental health aspect of things. I think, Johnny, what I don't understand is like you categorically said that you don't think, these sort of filtration points with background checks and sort of, training would make a discernible difference whatsoever. And I come to a conclusion based on a shit ton of pilot programs around the world, Israel, Switzerland, Czech Republic, Germany, where the data says that it is making a substantial, exponential impact to these situations from happening. And I think from my perspective, it's understanding why you don't see that as even possible. And even linking in mental health. I mean, I did some reading on mental health and guns, and I read a few psychiatric papers. And people that are violent, and people that aren't violent are not violent. And mental health sort of falls under that same spectrum. Because you have a mental illness doesn't mean you're violent. If you are a violent person, you're a violent person. And a lot of people in the psychiatric community don't see that making a discernible difference in the amount of homicides or the amount of deaths that are caused by guns in the US. And I think that's a debatable point. We can say that people that commit mass shootings, there's something wrong with them, but they wouldn't necessarily be diagnosed or picked up on the spectrums that currently they would be picked up on. But just kind of doubling back, Johnny, I'm really curious as to why you think that they wouldn't make any difference. I'm not asking because I'm criticizing. I just genuinely don't understand when we have a lot of data out there that says it would.
Well, again, the data, you mentioned it, other countries. And we have to look at the situation we have in this country. We already have the 400 million guns. They're already in the hands of bad people. I mean, that's the situation we're living in. Furthermore, any type of attempt to turn off the supply will be thwarted because we do live on the border of a third world country that will happily supply as many guns as we want. All you need is the demand. And of course, the demand's is not there right now.
So when did I say turn off the supply, though? I just want to go back. I never said turn off the supply.
Well, okay. Okay. So let's concentrate on the mental health counseling part, I guess is what you're asking me to do.
Well, no. It was a twofold thing because I don't understand
I got confused.
Okay. I was trying to do a nice little dovetail for Paul so that we're going to the subject that he's trying to usher us towards, which I'm on board with. I want to talk about that. So I'm trying to be a good for our facilitator here. Before we move on to that, I want to understand how you can categorically say that having people go through training programs and background checks and the stuff that is categorically successful in every other country in the world, what's your decision point for making that? I think you're saying that there's bad guys with guns, therefore we shouldn't try to make sure more people who get guns aren't able to handle those or aren't going to do bad shit with it. And I don't understand that because we have so many pilot programs around the world to say, there's a lot of good evidence out there that says we should do something. And the evidence in America says we're doing fuck all and people are dying.
Well, I think the devil is in the details. I mean, you'd have to ask me one thing at a time. Background checks. Okay, if we want to talk about background checks, we can. Putting it all together and saying, well, here are all these grab bag of things, and if we could just all implement these things. But if you want to talk about background checks, for example, yes, could you limit the number of shootings by implementing, let's say, very stringent background checks? Yes, you could. However, you could also eliminate a lot of crime by disregarding a lot of the protections of the Fourth Amendment just as easily. So do we do it? No, we don't. We don't do those things because there are certain liberties that we are entitled to, and we have to live with the downside of freedom. And again, with Fourth Amendment, yeah, we could stop a lot of crime if we could bust in and without a warrant. No doubt about it. I mean, then police would love to do that, right? But we don't allow that kind of thing, even though it may save lives. And
Can I?
background checks is one last point is
Yeah.
the devil is in the details. Tell me what it is that you're actually advocating that we do, and I might go along with it. But I also might find things in there that say, wait, this is a violation of fundamental rights. For example, ex parte discussions with a judge where you have your gun rights taken away from you and you had no due process. I have real issues with that.
But that's
could
not
it
accurate.
stand right? It could.
But that's not accurate with red. So there is specifically, if you're talking about the emergency, I forget what it is, the ERPOs or whatever, the red flag laws, which I think you have to go to if somebody sees that you're acting batshit crazy, and given that a gun is a responsibility, a sacred responsibility in my view, then a police officer, a doctor, or a family member can then say, this guy's acting a bit batshit crazy and he's got a few guns. They would take that to a judge, same way as you would get a warrant. And then the judge would make a determination to temporarily take away a gun. And then I think there's, it's done differently in a few different states, but generally at that stage, there's a due process element of it there. So
Yeah, but some of them are ex parte. So in other words, the person just all of a sudden gets a knock on the door. He's lost his gun rights. He's had no say in it whatsoever. And I have an issue with that. And so if you want to drag up the person up to the judge, where that person can explain his side of things, and the judge still decides, no, we're going to have to take the guns from you, I have less objection to that. But again, the devil's in the details. We say background checks. What does that mean? And those could violate fundamental rights or not. And I want to find out what it is that's being proposed before I say whether it's good or bad.
That's fair.
May I give you, how it works here, with red flag laws, and maybe it would be compromised. I don't know if you would be okay with it. That is up to you to decide. Let's say a neighbor, or somebody like that, spots, his neighbor, doing something that he should not be doing, going crazy or whatever. He goes to, a civilian, for example, goes to the police, reports it, and then they make their decision, should we act, should we not? And they step in, they, for example, take the firearms away from that person, but they need to, within a week, max a week, that's the legal limit, they need to get this, case in front of a judge, and then he decides, how it will proceed and stuff like that. Because, I bet that the red flag laws, if you would have to get, sometimes, would be a problem that if you have someone who is truly going mental, that it could take a while before this person can appear in front of a judge, simply put, because as well every country's civilized country, your judicial system is rather overwhelmed, it's the same here. But with these laws, we have specifically for this we have 1 week, and that is a work day, so 5 work days, that needs to be handled, or that person gets his guns back. Johnny, I know that you are a big fan of due process, would you be okay with this compromise, or is it pushing too much? Hello?
Yep. Are you there?
Yeah.
I didn't know if you were asking me a question or not.
Yeah, like Johnny, you are a big fan of due process, which I absolutely, like me too. However, like this, I think is a fair compromise. That is just my position. What do you think about that? Hello? I think his internet is
Actual
acting up.
time thing is really important as well.
Johnny, your internet again acted up. So like, can you start it again? Yeah.
Okay. Am I coming through okay now?
Yep,
Yeah.
you're good.
Okay. The time limit is going to be very important as well, because as you know, justice delayed is justice denied. And this idea, and if you're going to take away my fundamental rights, I'd better be able to respond in relatively soon. So I think that is fundamentally important. And every one of the examples that I've seen so far does have something like that built in. California got a hold of this, they would probably say, well, within a year. That's the way that state operates. But yeah, I think that's important. Again, it's all about making sure that people's fundamental rights are protected. The Fourth Amendment already has the ability to have a warrant deal. The Second Amendment doesn't. So if you're going to implement some sort of warrant-like thing where you go to a judge, you have to bend over backwards to safeguard the liberties of that person. So I just want to make sure that that's protected.
Right.
I think that's fairly reasonable, in terms of like, I'm not a big fan. I think I said this, I don't know if you watched when Sean and I's more recent conversation, but he had brought your video, Johnny, to my attention. And I agree, basically. I'm a big fan of due process too, right? You know what I mean? Like if you have a right to it, you have a right to it, right? And the idea of someone calling up and snitching on you, frankly, even makes me a little uncomfortable. I mean, whether you're right or left. I mean, like I'm obviously left of center. And, on the left, it's practically mythology about the McCarthy era, McCarthyism period. And, people saying, oh, so-and-so is a communist, and like people having their ability to work taken away from them over supposed political opinions they may or may not have held. And it was all based on someone's hearsay says, oh, I saw so-and-so at a meeting or whatever. Right. I think that kind of thing is bad for democracy in a big way, no matter who it is, and what you're talking about. But having said that, I do think that, yeah, if you could somehow make it a week turnaround, like if every state had, or every jurisdiction, not just state, but jurisdiction had a dedicated, like, okay, this is what this judge does. That's all he does is like adjudicate these things to make sure that they go faster. Maybe that would work. I have a question in general, because, as we're talking about this, it occurs to me that, Sean's introduced the broader problem of homicides and gun homicides. And it is a problem in this country. And yet we've also, I think, spent a lot of time, as I've already noted, on mass shootings. And those really tend to be of two different characters, especially with respect to the shooters. The shooters of mass homicides, more often than not, tend to have gotten their guns through legal methods. Whereas the people who we're talking about, like homicide, just your average day in Philadelphia kind of thing that John was talking about, as often as not, much more often than not, those guns were not procured legally in the first place. So you could sit around and talk about every gun control, mechanism that you want. They weren't legally required in point A. So my question for Johnny, and I'm just curious about this, because this is the only new gun control law that I really have any interest in. And it's one that I thought of myself some time ago. And it has to do with that Philadelphia situation, or New York, Chicago, any of these big cities where there is a lot of illegal guns on the street, and the various methods that are taken to get them. Sometimes they come from, maybe they're smuggled in through Mexico or something like that. But as often as not, I'm sure you've heard, they're straw purchases of one form or another. I would be very interested in a gun control law that said, like, if you could be proven to have sold your gun illegally, through not the proper methods, because there's only one reason to buy a gun illegally, not at a gun shop, not at a licensed dealer or a show or someplace like that. The only one reason to acquire a gun under the radar, and that's to use it for something under the radar. And that can't be legal. So my thought would be, and I don't know that this would help. It wouldn't help particularly the school shootings, but it might help the homicide problem, is to say, if you get caught selling a gun illegally that way, and then that gun is subsequently used in a homicide, you can be charged with that homicide because that was a foreseeable circumstance of you selling the gun illegally in the first place. What would you think of that?
Oh boy, I don't like the felony murder law. Never have, and I've actually found that, in my opinion, it's and has nothing to do with the gun thing, but its origins are primarily racist. But the idea that if even though you didn't actually kill somebody, you were part of a felony that was involved in it in some way, and it's a way to convict people of a heinous crime. Over something that they had no, let's say, no direct involvement. They did not want this to occur. If you want to say that they have committed a crime, and it could be a serious one, for example, we already have these laws on the book. In Wisconsin, for example, and I know this because I've done the Kenosha stuff, if you give a gun to a person illegally and they commit a crime, providing them that gun itself is a felony. And if they ends up with a shooting of somebody, it's an extra 5 years. So we already have those laws. You're talking about making them guilty of the actual murder itself. I have real issues with that. In my opinion, and this is true, if you go in and you participate in an armed robbery and your friend shoots the clerk, in my opinion, you're not supposed to be going up on a murder charge. You didn't kill the person. So I have fundamental problems with felony murder in the first place. But to say that you're guilty of murder when you didn't actually kill the person and you had no interest in having that person die and you didn't want it to happen.
Well,
I think that's severe.
Well, I hear you, and this, before I know other people want to jump in, the reason why I bring this up is because I'm still trying to get back to the fundamental, to me, questions, which are, first of all, there are two different types of problems we're talking about. The general homicide problem, which often, probably more often than not, happens with guns that weren't acquired legally in the first place, if they're gun homicides. And then the mass shooting problem, which has to do often with people who have acquired the guns legally and really no devisable, law that you could come up with would stop a lot of these people. They were perfectly legal citizens who were, well within their rights, who purchased guns and then, then did awful things with them. And so, you have two different problems. And what I want to see, talk about is how do we solve them? Now, in each case, I think supply is an issue. You might say, well, the mass shootings, though, the only way to cut off supply is to punish everybody when there's only, a very tiny percentage. Okay, I'm going to set that aside. But trying to cut off an illegal gun supply and make it just super duper unattractive to ever sell a gun illegally to anyone for any reason strikes me as a compromise. You know what I mean? Because if I know that if I take this revolver and sell it to this guy I don't know, and next thing I know someone got murdered with it, that I am liable. Maybe it shouldn't be a criminal liability. Maybe it should be a civil liability. Maybe I should be suable for wrongful death. But the point is, you sell a gun to somebody not through a legal channel, there isn't a good valid reason to buy a gun illegally. You can go in this country, you can, and mostly if you live in a state like New Jersey where it's difficult, you just come to Pennsylvania where it is. You know what I mean?
I will moderate you here, guys. I will moderate you here. In my opinion, you are strafing a wee bit of the topic. You started to spoke about legality of felony murders and stuff like that. So want to do that. Andrew, we will definitely get to that, but we didn't let Sean speak, on the red flag laws and stuff like that, those regulations. And I would like to suggest, if that's okay with you, after Sean is done talking, let's say 10-minute break. I will let a video play from pro-gun and anti-gun discussion, between people that is rather illuminating, in my opinion. So, Sean, if you could, or I don't know how, guys, you are with time. We didn't talk, about that.
Well, I was going to say, please feel free. This is a very interesting discussion, and I think it's useful. And I see we're getting some comments even. So please continue.
Yeah,
it's Father's Day, though.
Respond to those.
Yeah, it's Father's Day, and I've got a 7-year-old. So at 3:00, I've spent 3 hours on this, so I got to stop.
Yeah, fair enough. Like then we will skip the break, like and respond to like some comments. But Sean, like if you like you didn't comment like at all at the red flag laws and stuff like that, what we talked about before. So
I'm able to stick around for another hour or so, even if Dixon's got to bounce. But just on red flag laws, I think there is, and it sounds like Johnny, there is some room. I think we have some middle ground there that can be explored. And I know that red flag laws have been fairly unilaterally accepted as having a positive effect where they've been instituted. What I struggle with is I think that time frame. If let's say you identify somebody is at risk, and I think if you have a gun, for me, you have a responsibility. There's a certain level of responsibility and care you have to hold in the community if you have that. I mean, it's not like owning a phone. And if you have a gun and you make threats on Facebook to somebody saying you're going to shoot someone in the face or something to that effect, that's a highly irresponsible thing to say. And that is, for all intents and purposes, a red flag. I'm not making, giving my opinion on whether that is right or wrong to take their guns before putting them through, like let's say for a week, before giving them the opportunity to go to a judge. But giving them the opportunity to go to a judge, doesn't necessarily mitigate the issue. If anything, it might expedite that issue. And, I think if you have a gun, you need to act responsibly. And if somebody's identified in the community that you're dangerous, a magistrate or a judge who's been elected by the people has deemed you as a danger, or you look to be a danger. My initial reaction is I have no problem with the police showing up and taking that person's guns for some sort of arbitrary number that we can agree, a week, a month, whatever that is, so they can have their due process to get their guns back. I think, we need to keep in mind that there's the rights of the gun holder, but there's also the rights of the people that have been the victims in these crimes as well. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is before the Second Amendment. And we have a lot of people that are dying who, are the victims of irresponsible guns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the question I think that most pro-gun people would be is that, is the judge going to look at the evidence fairly? And that kind of depends on how they're elected. If they're elected, or whether they're what's the other appointed?
Appointed, yeah.
Yeah. So there's always opportunities for abuse, and we're just trying to make sure that doesn't happen. But just your point that Facebook, when you say, hey, I got a gun and I'm going to go shoot someone with it. Okay, that sounds pretty glaringly obvious, and that's an easy one. But there's going to be a lot of messages where the message is a little more cryptic, and that person has to have the opportunity to explain and provide evidence to support his claim that, no, there was nothing actually nefarious going on here. With ex parte, though, that could basically evaporate. Yeah. And that's what we're trying to stop.
And I think there's some. Oh, sorry, Johnny, I didn't mean to speak over you.
Go ahead. No, I'm done.
I think if because I did find there was a Yale professor who gave a talk on red flag laws to a psychiatric group, and what she was saying was in Florida, for example, Florida is just Florida. They're a dumpster fire no matter what happens. Florida, there was quite a few, I don't know what you call it, red flags that were declared, but in states like Missouri, Wisconsin, I think. It was one other state that Indiana was another state that used it heavily. It was something like 0.04% of those cases that were flagged, the person's guns were actually taken. And I think, there's going to be instances where maybe the law was enacted and it's a bit too expeditious to take the gun away. But there is working examples that we can expand on. And I think we don't look at the extreme and say, we shouldn't do it because of this situation or this judge. We find the balance and we make sure that those people that are being irresponsible lose their guns. And I don't have sympathy for somebody who acts stupid, who owns a gun. Because again, I think if you are going to have that responsibility of owning a gun, I think the standard with which you have to act with that gun is different to anything else. I don't think you can act like a complete dickhead, walking around flailing it in the air, threatening people, and assume that, well, it's my right to keep it no matter what. There's other people have rights to live a happy, safe life. And I think that gets infringed on when people start acting irresponsibly with guns.
Yeah, I mean, as long as there's due process followed, I have far fewer problems with any of the red flag laws. My only concern would be is to make sure that due process followed in spirit and not just on paper, which is always going to be an issue. But I guess I'm done.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Andrews, you were saying that you're gonna have to go, so I would like to basically go over a few things with you. Johnny, you have still time, or how are you with it?
I'm okay but about 5 minutes. I think when you guys
sure, Johnny, you still have time, mate?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, Andrew, I just wanted to talk to you a bit. I believe what's your position, on rifles, AR-15s and such, and do you think, civilians have access to it, and stuff like that?
Well, I mean, rifles is like a broad term, right? I mean, rifles are farm equipment. You know what I mean? Your basic hunting rifle or things that fall into that category.
That's why I specified by AR-15 and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, my concern, and I try not to get too caught up in the demonizing of this one particular weapon or that particular weapon, but it is noticeable. I have to say, as somebody I don't own any guns. It's not something that interests me particularly to own any. And then when you see these mass shootings, that AR-15s are so commonly involved, and you do have to ask yourself, well, why that one? What is it about it that's attractive? And it's probably, I understand that lots and lots and lots of people own AR-15s, but you don't hear about mass shootings commonly with a lot of other types of rifles. So, and I've read about it, and one of the things you read is that the way that an AR-15 is constructed, that it is easy enough with some simple modifications to turn it from semi to full automatic. That may be true of other guns as well. I don't know, but but because of that, and because of its, I don't want to take one particular gun and say this is the one that if we got rid of this one, then everything would be fine. That's clearly not the case. What I'm concerned about is and that's why I think the magazine thing is more of an issue to me. Like any weapon, any ability to fire, that many rounds in that short of a time. Anybody who's decided to go be a mass shooter, they are obviously nobody walks around, as Johnny said, as Sean said. I mean, even here in the United States, where perhaps it's more common to have these things happen than elsewhere in the world, I don't really expect when I go to the mall, to the show, to the supermarket, to wherever, that's going to happen. I'm not prepared for it. So anytime that this happens, the shooter's got the jump. And the more, the fact that he's got the jump means he's going to be able to fire a certain number of rounds, even if I'm packing. And I think of myself as Rambo and ready. I don't know. They're going to have the jump. They're going to be able to fire. And the more rounds they can fire before something else can stop them happen, the worse it is. So I'm interested in seeing, laws that, and that's my concern. The big thing is, I think I said this on my channel, and this is where I'll stop. I even understand, to me, if I were a private gun owner who wanted to have the fun and good time of shooting an AR-15 because I like to target shoot with them, what is wrong with keeping them at the firing range, where the only real place I can keep them or use them? You know what I mean? Keep them there. And then if you don't have them there, then you don't need them to defend yourself. You don't need them to hunt. They're not for defense. They're not for hunt. They're for assault. That's what they're for. And if you want to play assault on the firing range, go right ahead. I don't care. I do care when it's in a school.
Right.
Yeah. By the way, the AR-15 is probably the ideal weapon for hog hunting.
Yeah, he cut out again, but in
Did you guys hear me?
Yeah. No, it was Dixon that cut out.
On my screen, it was Johnny Walker Dread who cut out. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just say it again. The AR-15 is actually an ideal hog hunting rifle. It's by far the most favored, because the things are fast. It's you use a bolt action.
Right.
It's not worth it.
Andrew, may I ask you, like, why you have issues with AR-15, let's say, or 5.56 rifles, like being owned by civilians? Is it the increased lethality, or what's that? And if you could keep it brief,
Yeah, it's the sensibility that any of those weapons, they are designed to fire as many rounds as possible, as fast as possible, and that makes them extremely effective for people who wish to kill as many people as possible in as short a time as possible.
Yes, I understand your point, but are you also acknowledging that they are extremely effective at self-defense?
Well, I mean, I guess if I were being attacked by the Czech army, I would agree, but I'm very unlikely to be attacked by more than...
Mate, no, watch out. You are absolutely right, like the for example, the impact from 5.56 or 223 Remington, like is quite devastating when you compare it with 9mm, like pistol round, or 45, for example. That is its purpose, but you are, you simply, and I will here go on a limb. I will go on a limb, and I don't think you have much experiences with, like self-defense, like situations, like that you, like haven't been, for example, in a gunfight, haven't been, like attacked, like stabbed and stuff like that, Is that, like accurate? No, I mean, okay. And I don't mean, by the way, that I'm just saying, like, it's authority. But if I give you an example, for example, just one example, where there was a shootout between a police officer and a suspect. The man was shot 14 times. 8 of the times, those were lethal wounds, and he was still coming at the police officer, still shooting, still running around. The police officer had a 9mm handgun. I'm saying if he would have AR-15 then and there with him, he would put 2 to his chest, and that man would have been done. And I'm sorry, that is precisely what I want from a defensive firearm.
Well, listen, I take your point. I'm sure if I am ever walking down the street and someone starts firing at me, if I happen to have an AR-15, I'd be very grateful for having it at that precise moment.
Can be a home invasion. Can be home invasion. You know what I mean, and stuff like that.
All the things you're talking about are on the scale of likelihood so infinitesimally small. And the problem is what's becoming literally more likely in this country. I mean, if you look up home invasion with blah, blah, it's not anywhere near as likely, unfortunately, as someone walking into a school. And that is the problem.
I absolutely get you, but like here's the issue, that you need to accept the responsibility if you take those guns away. And then this is what doesn't make the statistics. Let's say you ban those AR-15s, and let's say there is a home invasion, and despite you are saying that they are not as likely, they still happen. And so let's say you take from a single mom, because AR-15s are great at shooting because they are low recoil, relatively easy to handle and stuff like that, in comparison with pistols. You know what I mean? So single mom, like absolutely can have a AR-15 as a home defense, like weapon. And she doesn't have suddenly access to that, like weapon. She has only to a 9mm pistol.
I know where you're going, but
yeah, and she gets killed as a result of that she doesn't have now the AR-15. You need to acknowledge that blood is, like on the hands of the people who took that gun away from her.
I guess so, but I'm going to tell you, listen, there isn't a single instance that you could find me of a single mom at home successfully defending herself with an AR-15.
It's not AR-15. It's not AR-15. I can right now pull up an example. Like she shot him with a shotgun. You know what I mean?
You know what? I will say this about shotguns, and like this is one I'm in favor of. If you want to call it in favor of. I heard once a guy, I'm trying to remember where it was, but some guy was talking about, what's an effective home defense weapon? And he said shotgun. And here's why. Somebody breaks into your home, you lock yourself into the room with the shotgun. And then when you hear them, you go, shh. Everybody knows what that sound means. Only one thing makes it. And you tell them, I just cocked my shotgun, take another step, and you're gone. And that's it. You know what I mean? Like they know what you're holding.
Right.
Yeah, if they're armed, you have now warned them.
Yeah,
to open fire, essentially. But one point I would like to make on this: the full automatic, we got rid of them. I would much rather have an AR-15 on full auto if I'm facing somebody. It's really hard to aim them things. You fire, the gun comes up and you're just spraying everywhere. And we saw it in LA when we had all those drive-by shootings with the MAC-10s and stuff. There were bullets everywhere and almost nobody dying. Now with the AR-15 with select fire, and there's a reason why soldiers use select fire. They almost never use full auto. They use select fire because it allows them to bring the rifle back down to aim again. I say weld all of these AR-15s at full auto and we're good. I'm joking.
Man,
All right, I'm going to have to go, gentlemen. It's been
Sure.
a pleasure, though. I appreciate it, and you know, I do think I will say just one final thought before I leave. And Paul, you've made this point, and you're right that the problem is that there isn't enough trust between people like, I suppose, myself, who are suspicious of the need for certain kinds of guns for the individual and the gun community in general, which is why, by the way, I do think that Sean's idea of the training and like the idea, because what I want is people who are legal, happy gun owners who enjoy their guns. They're the ones who need to, I mean, I want to, I mean, to me, it's almost like the burden is on you guys because it's one of your own who will walk into a school in the sense that they're going to be somebody who bought the gun legally, maybe showed up at a gun show, maybe hung out with you one time because they like guns. And then they show up at a school and they do this. I'll never meet them. You're right, because I'm not going to hang out at those places. I'll never know them to flag them. I'll never know them to say, gee, there's something wrong with this guy. That's my idea about the hobby thing, is that it's got to be people who are around them, who they trust, who can say, you know, fella, like maybe we need to cool it a bit. Maybe you need to like not be so compulsive about how the world's wronged you while you're thinking about your guns. Let's go hang out and have a beer instead. Whatever. You know what I mean? Like that's what you got to worry about.
Mm-hmm. By the way, one final comment as you're departing, keep an eye out for the Crystal Kaiser case coming up. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but her boyfriend gave her a gun. She went down and shot that man dead. It's been 3 years. He hasn't been charged.
Dixon, shall we cover that one next?
I think so.
All right, we're on it.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right,
Oh,
take care, Dixon. Or Andrew.
Cheers, mates.
Bye.
Sure.
So I would like to,
Okay.
I know you're moving on, so I don't want to jump in, but if we can come back to that, I do have some thoughts on open carry and AR-15s, but I know you did want to segue to something there, Paul.
Yeah, I basically wanted to take, like a short, refresh break, like bathroom break, let the video play. There's a 10-minute video from pro-gun, like anti-gun, like people. And I would say that it's rather, like illustrating, of, because I don't know, like Sean and you can you tell me, like Dixon, like are you guys, like gun owners?
No,
At all?
Dixon and I are not gun owners.
Yeah.
And actually, for all intents and purposes, I think guns are pretty damn cool. Of course, they're cool. They look awesome. I love mechanical things.
Yeah, and if you think about it, like especially self-loading firearms, they are literally machines powered by controlled explosion. How is that not cool? You know what I mean?
No kidding. I don't think at any point Dixon and I have expressed an anti-gun view, and I think that gets but I think us saying we want you to be educated, and for me, it's if I was a gun owner, if I truly was a gun owner, I would want to go through all the training. I'd want to, be the responsible person that represents my hobby well and makes my neighbors feel safe. And and I don't understand like that for me is the direction I would go. I do like guns, and I've gone clay shooting. Not that that means anything, and there's people here that are going to give me shit saying he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. Fair enough, but I understand guns are very cool.
Yeah, we can talk, are you guys, both of you, are you okay with the 10-minute break? Also the audience, we can get back to that, yeah? Okay, guys, so I'll let play.
One thing is that we do also have a lot of people who've been making comments. At some point, we probably should look through those.
Yeah, I already was going through a few. Guys, if you could repeat some questions in our points, definitely do that, because there's quite a lot of comments. Thank you for that. I apologize.
If you have something that you already posted that you really think is great, go ahead and post it again.
Yeah, precisely.
You.
Because so you understand, I'm alone, on moderating or at least keeping track of the comments, basically, and I also need to keep track of what is said, and it is quite nuanced, discussion. So yeah, it's rather difficult to keep everything in mind there. So definitely post it again. So guys, let's say 10 minutes. Yeah, I'll let the video play. So we will be back in a bit. So I do apologize. Then if the audio, just write quickly if the audio is going through or not. You have no. Okay. I love StreamYard. I'll try to work it out there, guys. Bear with me. So.
I grew up in, sometimes a gun is the only way to protect yourself. You're
Is it now
anti-gun.
going through?
You don't want nobody to have guns. But then that's gonna put my family at danger.
The pool to the left, I'm gonna have all my pro-gun people go stand on the edge of that light, and all my anti-gun people on the other side.
Cool. I'll leave it as it's there.
First statement is, I think my views on guns could change.
Oh, I feel like anyone's views can change on things, so I'm kind of surprised that nobody felt like it could change at all. I don't think that I could change completely to like the other side, but I would definitely be open to like looking at it from a different perspective.
I think that my stance is very accommodating to both sides. That said, I feel really solid about kind of what I've learned and what I think is possible. So I feel really solid about that, although I'm, open to accommodating for people's needs, people's wishes with their rights. My name is Aaron Clayton. After the Orlando shooting, I realized that my community was very much a target. I had to get involved to do something.
Sometimes I think people on the other side of the issue don't care about me or my loved ones' lives.
I gotta go with that one. I gotta go with that one. I mean, the area that I grew up in and where I come from, a lot of you may not be able to understand that sometimes a gun is the only way to protect yourself. We all believe there should be certain rules to getting them, but on my side of the earth, there is no gun laws. My name is Asani Hill. Regardless of whatever you say, there's always gonna be guns. There's always gonna be violence in the world, and I got family protect.
I don't think y'all don't care about me or my family, I think we all care about, each other and each other's others, loved ones.
I don't care about y'all. I'm trying to protect me and mine.
Yeah, I feel you.
That's my reason of saying that nobody else cares about it, because I'm pretty sure y'all have the same insight. Like, you're anti-gun. You don't want nobody to have guns. But then that's gonna put my family at danger.
I don't want
That's not at all.
Yeah, I don't want
that's at
nobody
all
to have
what we're
guns.
saying. I think that there
That's
are
just
ways.
how I feel. Like,
Totally.
The pro-gun people a lot of times are like, well, it's never going to be solved. Like, gun violence is never going to end. And like,
It won't.
It won't, and you're absolutely correct, but there's a bunch of ways to decrease it.
I've been in a situation in which my life was in danger.
I grew up in St. Louis, so we'd go downtown where there's a huge amount of violence. We're at Home Depot, and there's guys starting to gather around my dad's truck, and I'm in it alone. I'm 14 years old. And literally I had to pull my dad's gun out while I'm shaking, and literally just set it on my lap. And to show that, it ended up potentially violent, potentially robbery, you know?
I don't think people automatically are born like, I'm pro-gun. Like, I think what you experience in your life makes you that way.
My name is Sarah. It wasn't until recently that my opinion changed on how I felt about guns, and then I became pro-gun in order to protect me and my future family.
I was never pro-gun before, and then some guy broke into my place and raped me. And I couldn't run away, I couldn't do anything, like literally had to lay there and take it. But I knew that if I had a gun at that point in time on my nightstand, I would have defended myself.
I think America has a problem with mass shootings.
Yeah, I think we all should step forward for that one. Come on.
It'd be ignorant to say it's not an issue. Like, I don't want anyone to die. Like, I don't want to see these school shootings. I don't want people to get hurt. We're all for protecting ourselves, but I think like when guns are not in the right hands, then it becomes an issue. And I don't think any of us support that at the end of the day.
So you all for like stricter gun laws or no?
I mean, there's a point where it goes too far. I don't think I need to take a 5,000 questionnaire for a psychological test, you know?
But like, isn't that worth it? And like, I'm not saying that that's necessarily what we would definitely do or whatever, but like a 5,000 questionnaire or like people's lives.
But sometimes
like, wouldn't you rather?
Would you be willing to go through the same process to get an automobile? Training, licensing,
Yeah.
classes,
Yeah.
a renewable license.
Yeah, but not a psychological test.
I think it doesn't have to be so extensive, what you're saying, but it's sad how someone can come into a gun show and have a lot of money, buy whatever they want, show maybe a little card or something, and get like maybe 20 guns. And no one's asking you just because you have money. A simple background check can just do a lot for people.
But I also think that a lot of people, like, because they don't want to have the conversation about gun violence, and they switch over and say like, oh, it's mental illness, and like that needs to be talked about too. But gun violence is a separate issue that also like really needs to be talked about.
If my life was in danger, I would kill.
Oh, hell yeah.
Can I walk faster?
No, I literally don't think I would have like it in. I don't know if I would have
Nobody has it in them until the moment comes.
Yeah.
Like literally fear doesn't even become a thing anymore.
Yeah.
Like it disappears and it's like fight or flight.
Yeah.
Like, and you either freeze and die or you make it.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I'm gonna make it.
Some people don't got it in them. You can always just, shoot them in a place where they won't be able to move.
Yeah. Well, that's what some people think, but when I went to I did my carry and conceal class, they said if you're trying to shoot them in the leg, you have enough time to get away or to realize you're not in danger. Your life isn't in danger, you know? And so they said, if you're pulling that gun out and you're shooting somebody, you're shooting to kill.
I guess I don't understand. I understand fighting for your life. That's why I came to the center, for sure. But like all this talk about like how to protect ourselves, how to be in these situations, blah, blah, blah. It's like, again, we're just increasing guns. And I want to bring us back to like, how can we combat this from the other end? I don't want to carry guns. I don't want to have guns in my club. I don't want to. I want to be there to dance. I don't want to have a firearm on my leg and like
But we
be with
live in a
friends.
society that
So you rather
can't we-
not
but
have a
we're-
gun?
I don't think we
But
can
can't we-
retract from that though.
Yes, we can.
We can because other countries have done that.
Yeah, but you're
successfully.
taking the right away.
No,
at
no,
that
no. But
point.
wait. If I can prove to you that there are ways to enact gun reform that will decrease the amount of guns out there, increase education, and not hurt the ability of law-abiding citizens to have access to firearms, would you be willing to discuss ways to do that?
Yeah, I'm all for education, but I don't think like at the end of the day, like if someone's trying to kill me, I'm gonna kill them. I mean,
Okay, so but that is, you're allowed to right now. You're
Yeah.
allowed to have that gun. And so we keep kind of saying what is already in place. This is already possible to have all of these guns. How can we start looking at this and, changing our minds and our Congress, our government, leaders' minds? You guys keep talking about education, but that is not a reality. in that we're not allowed to instill reform that gives us gun education. So it's just like layman's ideas, batting around ideas on how to kill. How to kill.
I'm overall against violence at the end of the day. I wouldn't need or want to have a gun if there wasn't violence in the world. Sometimes it's a right because it's a necessity sometimes.
So how do we do that, where we start changing the conversation, where people don't immediately relate pro-gun to, or don't, that pro-gun can equal pro-gun reform?
Oh, I mean, that's why we're all here.
That's why we're all here.
We're all risking something by saying something. I always taught that don't ever state your opinion on hot topics because you're just asking for it at that point.
Right.
But I feel like you have to speak up because being silent is being just as guilty.
I think the society needs to learn to speak. Like, educated people need to sit down, come together, and talk about things. You guys have something to say, and we said it, and we accept all of each other's views.
Yeah, I told you we wouldn't all leave hating each other.
All right, everybody, that's a wrap.
Cool.
So, cheers. Give me a second, I'd like to just have a visitor.
By the way, were those actors or were those real people?
Give me a second. There's a real world issue, and guys, if you could discuss. As far as I know, those weren't actors because there were, at least for that to be actors, let's say from the left side or left side of the aisle, there were way too strong arguments for gun ownership. So
well, that's true. Yeah.
I'll be right back. You guys discussed. There's some real world issue. So so I apologize.
It's all right. So I missed that last thing. Sorry, I had my own life going on. What did Paul just say about? Well, if you could reiterate.
If it was paid actors, then it would have been put out by an actual movie production crew, and everything would have been very much anti-gun, is what he was saying. The fact that there was a very good pro-gun arguments means that this was probably real people. It's a little bit of a slight, but I tend to agree with it.
No, that's not too far off. I think there is, like, if you look at Twitter, I wholeheartedly agree that a lot of Twitter leans towards the liberal side of things, and I'm somebody who I really like what Elon's trying to do. I think part of it's not censorship. Twitter is a private business, and I know this is straying from topic a bit, but being able to see what people are saying in these public forums is really important, and being able to identify people that are not quite right, or whenever you have somebody who's committed, let's say, a mass shooting, there's always telltale signs in how they communicate with the public. And if you start censoring people and their views on guns, for example, which you could say that some liberal media wants to do, then you're not going to learn about their views.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the censorship is real. I mean, I've actually undergone it myself. One of the reasons why I have no reach at all on Twitter is simply because my views have been sort of marked, but that's the way it is. By the way, there are some things that, and this would be kind of an interesting little exercise, but the things that bother me about pro-gun and gun control people. And number one, I don't want to hear about how many guns you own at the start. I'm a gun owner, and I believe, well, okay, then I'm going to ignore you, because if you're opening them with that, what are you trying to tell me? So that's a pet peeve of mine. This thing about, well, somehow because I was in the military, that means that my views are stronger. No, they don't mean anything.
That's a resume statement. In interrogation, if you're trying to show that you're legit, that's you're giving yourself a background to make a statement so that somebody buys into what you're saying.
Go ahead. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah, if I may, give you, to what example, this military. I'm a military, therefore I know about weapons. It's sometimes even bullshit. Is that I'm quite into like geeking into armored vehicles, tanks, like APCs and stuff like that. And I was watching basically experts react to, for example, video games, and there was a American, like from U.S. Army, a tank commander that was commenting basically on the tanks and on how it works and blah blah blah. Anyway, he was saying that the modern anti-tank rounds, that they are designed. Those are basically gigantic darts, that are going like supersonic, like insanely fast, and they are designed basically to pierce the armor, like through and through, and as they are going through, to create basically a vacuum or sucking effect and to suck the crew out. And
Okay.
And
Hey, there's a new one.
Yeah, I was literally, and I commented, right, like on that video, that's not how it works and stuff like that, and plenty of the, let's say, the viewers of that were, oh, are you in the army? Do you understand that? And stuff like that, and like that I don't have official certification on something doesn't mean that I don't understand something, what I mean? And so yeah, that just because someone has a certification and stuff like that doesn't necessarily make them an expert. Yeah, so keep that in mind, guys.
Right. I mean, everybody is entitled to their opinions, and their opinions are not, like better or worse simply because of their background. It's something to consider sometimes. Like you may not be understanding the other side of the argument because of your background, but this whole idea, well, you're just one of those gun lovers. Well, okay, but my argument still might be right. But that's ad hominem, we know it.
But I could say the same about half the people in the chat here who were trolling Dixon and I, which I have no problem with. I love it. But a lot of like every time I look up, I love seeing the shit that's taking the piss out of us. But the thing is, you have people that are disqualifying our views because we're not gun owners, and that's fair. You're entitled to do so. But I live in the same society. I'm entitled to an opinion on what makes me feel safe or not. I have rights, and equally same as a gun owner has rights to carry a gun. I have rights to not want to get shot in a public place, and I think that's for me there's a distinction there.
And by the way, there's another phony out there, and that is not the person who's claims to be an expert military gun owner kind of thing, but also the surgeons that come through and tell us about how many people they have treated with AR-15 wounds and stuff. Give me a break. The number of people that go through a hospital with AR-15 wounds is really tiny. They're used in mass murders quite a bit, but in terms of actual everyday shootings, almost never. But every time we have one, everybody's an expert surgeon who can tell them what he's seen. It's like, yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah, if I may, just before we go into the comments and stuff, like two things, guys. First, Sean, like the yeah, like you are absolutely right. Like you basically have the right, like, for that opinion to not be shot in the face. However, like Dixon was sometimes making, like basically arguments, like on stuff, like how firefights work or how weapons work that are not based in reality. You know what I mean? So that is, like somewhere where I believe, like the audience was rightfully calling him out, like on that.
Yeah, so I think he's sort of throwing in examples. I don't think he's actually. If you were to go back and listen, I don't think he's specifically making a structured argument. He's using examples on what he perceives to make a greater point. I don't think he's actually made, and he may have. You can call me out on this. I might be wrong, but I didn't get the impression he was making specific arguments about how guns work or what guns should or shouldn't do. Yeah. I think he was using it more for the greater point of what it's like to protect yourself in certain instances.
Right, and like one more thing, mate. I hope like you show this, like to Dixon, because one of our like audience members actually found out an example of 8 months pregnant woman that defended herself from a burglar with a AR-15. So
yeah, we had one here in Oklahoma not too terribly long ago. It was a home invasion, I think by 4, and they took out all 4 of them, and so. It does happen. Yeah. Well, whatever. So yeah, shall we go ahead and go to the comments?
Yeah, absolutely. Just one last thing, guys. What did you think about the video? Because I regret. I personally regretted there wasn't the full debate anywhere, because I think that was a rather good one.
I stepped away from a bit. I only caught a little bit of it, and a lot of it mirrored what we were talking about between that whole conversation on what should you and should you not have to go through to get a gun. And I think there's a reoccurring theme even in this conversation and theirs as to what sort of due diligence do you have to go through.
Yeah, I thought the video was fine.
Okay, so
it covered
going
everything.
to the comments, by the way, guys, if you have any comments that you, for example, maybe you don't know where they are, if you've seen any, both of you, yeah, if you want to bring anything up, like absolutely do that, yeah.
And by the way, let's avoid any comments that are disparaging. We don't need that crap. I mean, I don't mind if they do it. I mean, it's a free country, it's a comment section, but let's not address anything where it's, disparaging people. I don't have any use for it.
They're just jealous. It's just jealousy, Johnny. That's all it is. They hear us articulating, and they just wish they could be up here.
Anyway, this is like a great comment. Statistics don't lie. People will lie their ass off with statistics, and that is absolutely true. One of the things I wanted to, Sean, to basically, go into a bit, is the statistic, with gun homicides and how that in US, how that those numbers, the statistic, the very basis of it is very imperfect. And that is that, first of all, you are absolutely leading the world, in gun homicides. That is undeniable. However, you are not that bad when it comes to the, homicides in some such matter. You are somewhere between Western and Central Europe and Eastern Europe, when it comes to homicides rate, as such. So the first, the issue is that if, let's say, you would heavily restrict firearms, wouldn't the homicides happen, just with, for example, knives, or other tools, That is, something that you cannot dismiss. And just one more when it comes to statistics is that the homicide, well, that doesn't mean, that those rates, they include even legal self-defense shootings, which I think they should not, because that is, I'm sorry, if there's a legal self-defense shooting, that should not be used as an anti-gun argument.
Okay. I would like to approach this thing in the more broader sense of just talking about statistics rather than any particular instance. We have to be very careful. First of all, if first thing I see when I hear a study is I look up the bylines of the authors. And if you go in, and especially if they're out of the CDC, you're going to find that most of the people that are involved in these studies are actually, I would say, almost quasi-activists. There's a problem with that, and it's not ad hominem. The problem with it is that they're not going to publish results that defy their own worldview. They're not going to do it. And I've worked with enough scientists to know how they operate. And I know exactly how to lie with statistics. I've taught classes in it. So, the results are not really looking good. Let's run the study a little longer. Or just outright file drawer effect. And it's a real effect. Let's just put it in the file, in the drawer, because it didn't affirm what we want. Then you compound that problem with meta-analysis, which is absolute voodoo. But it drives a lot of the anti-gun arguments in the country. So I'm always really suspicious of any kind of statistics drawn out in the research. In my opinion, only the Bureau of Justice should be doing analysis of these things. The CDC has no business getting involved. It's not a disease. And I'm sorry. I know they say they want to say, well, now disease is broader than that. No, you broadened it because you wanted to go into these areas. But gun violence does not follow typical disease patterns. It's not a disease at all. And yet they want this. And by the way, I should say, the head of the CDC at one time did say that not only was it his aim to get rid of guns in his country, but that he was going to push for that through his actual organization. Now he got canned, but that tells you what the CDC is all about. So I have real issues with statistics. I just want to be really careful with it. Go ahead. Sorry, Sean. I know you've been wanting to say something.
Okay, so when we talk about the statistics I refer to, I am referring to CDC statistics, raw data. I'm not referring to a study. I specifically don't go down that route of going to studies or papers unless they're papers that are clinical in nature. So when I looked up information on red flag laws, I looked up clinical analyses from people who are doing peer-reviewed papers, specifically because they're more interested in furthering their career than they are making a political point. Gary Kleck is a good example. He's written the most supportive study on gun defense, where his survey, I think he called something like 4 million people, and found that 2 million of those supported that they use their gun to protect themselves or save their life. And he's somebody who is not a pro-gun person. He's a scientist. And the CDC statistics are just that, and they define what those statistics are. And I think there's a point to be made about there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, but that's not to say you can discount them. If you're saying, one of the comments said something. What was the comment again, Paul?
Oh, we'll point. No.
Statistics are lies.
Statistics don't lie. People will lie their ass off with statistics.
And that's a fair point. My father, one of my favorite stories about statistics, my father mentioned, I don't know how true this is. It's something I remember him telling me as a kid. When the U.S. Army came out with helmets, it was back in World War I, I think it was, or when they started wearing metal helmets. I don't know how long ago it was. More people were getting shot in the head, and people were starting to question whether the helmets were making any difference to safety of those soldiers, when in reality, the soldiers had a perception that these things were going to stop bullets and were lifting their heads up more freely. And there's a lot of different ways to perceive a statistic either way. And I think that's what Schrodinger's cat's been saying. But when you look at, let's say, those raw data, those pieces of statistics, and you see how many people are being killed by homicide, and the fact that 80% of those are gun related, or even if you look at suicide rates, or homicide rates in the United Kingdom, you make the argument, well, if they're not going to kill with guns, they're going to kill with knives. I think there's a problem in making that leap, because killing somebody with a knife or strangling them is not an easy way to kill anybody. It's a lot of times police look at that as a crime of emotion or passion, and guns are a little bit more clinical, a little bit more easy. That's why suicide, in my view, this is my opinion, so I'm not saying that this is a declarative, but in my opinion, it's, you see higher rates of suicide with gun because it's so easy and so accessible for people. So when you see in the US that you are 5 times more likely to be murdered, and 80% of the time it's a gun, I think that's a statistic that we need to analyze.
By the way, the analogy with the helmets was that because what was killing a lot of soldiers was the shrapnel coming down from the explosions. But the fact that the helmets were stopping that from them from dying from that meant that they were going to be shot elsewhere. Yeah. And so so that's what that argument was all about. And by the way, Australia actually has a higher suicide rate now than before the gun ban.
Yeah. And well, they actually have there's a statistic. Well, there's people, I heard this on, I watched I think I mentioned it to you, Johnny, on email, Colin Noir on Joe Rogan this past week. And I'm sure a lot of people in the audience have probably seen that. He's a lawyer and a gun advocate. He was talking about people not robbing Texas, or Oklahoma is a good example. Somebody who has a lot of towns, states that have. I'm having trouble with English all of a sudden. Oklahoma and Texas are perceived to have a lot of guns, and the whole thing was people won't burglarize or rob people in Oklahoma or Texas because there's a perception that if they do it, they will be shot. But if you look at the statistics of how many burglaries, just raw data, happen per state, Oklahoma is one of the worst as far as breaking and entering burglaries. Texas is middle of the table. So you can't really draw a correlation between your house is safer from being burgled because your state is pro-gun. So it's you can correlate certain things with statistics.
May I, this is I don't know,
meth is huge. Am I okay?
Yeah, I think so. I think we had a bit of a freeze up there.
Yeah. Burglary rates here, they're devised primarily and everywhere, are kind of socioeconomic and also meth. We have a huge meth problem. And so what would it be like if we didn't? Who knows? You know, I mean, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that in Oklahoma, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is like far more rural, like area, and it is far easier to figure out if someone is home or not. You know what I mean? So you should, like the data that you should be comparing is the rates of burglaries when people were home. Like to have it, like in my opinion,
we have
fair.
a lot of property crime too because there's a lot of farm equipment that's easier to steal. So who knows? I mean,
that's counted into.
All I can go by is how I feel. I feel safe here. That's all I can do.
Yeah, and I think you are. I just think, from my point of view, whenever you see people making a sort of a causal relationship between the perception of guns and safety in your home, I don't know that you can make that leap with the data that we have, with the statistics. So it's for me, safety, and I think Oklahoma is somewhere that I would go, and even with all the guns and what I've discussed, my dissatisfaction with the gun laws, I still feel like I'd be relatively safe.
Yeah, I mean, I always said that they always talk about open carry, and or I should say, permitless carry, and they always say, "Oh my God, it's going to turn into the wild, wild west. There's going to be shootings every day. People are going to be." It turns out that life goes on pretty much the same before as after. We have now permitless carry here, and while crime has gone up a little, it's actually gone up a little bit less than the national average. Ultimately, it doesn't really affect anything. I don't think it makes it safer. I'm not going to go on and say, if everybody carried a gun, there'd be no more crime. I'm not going to go there. I don't think that's true, but I also don't think it makes it even more dangerous at all. I think it pretty much has no effect at all. California and Oklahoma are very close in terms of crime in many, many ways, homicide rates and stuff. One is extremely strict. The other is not. So what's the actual factor? I think it's socioeconomic, really.
Right. Sorry, Paul, go ahead. I think you were going to say something.
No, if you have some retort to it, if you could keep it brief, to that, I would like to move to other comments.
Let's go on to another comment. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, the only thing I was going to add on to that, I'm trying to remember what I was going to say. I think that the one inalienable truth that I don't think anybody can argue with is more guns will equal more shootings. That's a fact. It's, you can't argue the simple maths. And it's then trying to regulate that. Sorry, Paul, go ahead.
I remember that I just wanted to, straighten your argument, Sean, and that is where you are absolutely right. Plenty of times, people who would shoot someone would not stab someone, you know what I mean? Because it's easier with a firearm, and it has a certain... You can distance yourself away from it. It's not as so you understand, we've evolved as a species, where so much that, for example, stabbing someone, hitting someone, choking someone, that is a deeply, instinctual reaction, that we have in all of us, unless you are a psychopath. Those are full on exception, you know what I mean? So that there is a big thing in your brain. Killing is wrong, you know what I mean, to a degree. There's again obviously exceptions, enemy in war and stuff like that, different thing, but let's be honest, most of the homicides anywhere in the world are committed by our loved ones, you know what I mean? So there's absolutely a thing where if someone has, let's say, the guts to shoot someone, because we don't have yet this instinctual reaction for pulling a trigger and seeing someone falling over. We simply don't connect it, so much. Yeah. A different thing is obviously organized crime and stuff like that. Yeah, or career criminals. That's a different point. But let's say these murders of passion. There's quite a lot of evidence that is saying that the amount of firearms directly correlate with the amount of murders of passion.
Let's go on to another comment.
Yeah.
I don't want to
So
leave people out.
I had, like here, this is, like in my opinion, a big thing. Not necessarily this example, but what it represents, Tyler says, look at the study about guns being locked up. If you have 100 guns and 99 are locked up, but you carry one on you, the study considers that you don't lock up your guns. I don't know if the study is true and stuff like that, but the example of it is that what I see constantly is that plenty of people that are having discussions, debates, whatever, or drive discussions, like on one side, I see it mostly on the left, to be honest, are using these studies and other things and statistics not in good faith. They know they are bullshit, and they use it in such a way, and that creates quite a lot of the distrust from the gun owners to the, I don't know, liberals or whoever, I don't know who I would say.
Well, I think that's too broad a statement for me to agree with, though. I think that's a blanket statement that doesn't necessarily apply to everybody.
The problem is that people, only want to read the headline. And we know from the Kyle Rittenhouse deal what that leads to. The other one is that sort of, let's say, dishonest, disingenuous approach. For example, I've heard many times where, you're more likely to shoot a loved one than you are, anybody else. Well, if you look at the study, you're more likely to shoot somebody you know. But a lot of the times, the burglar that's getting in your house is somebody you know. In fact, I would suggest half the time it's somebody you know because they knew what you had. So what's the truth? Well, if you want to know the truth, if you trust the study at all, you need to read it. And you need to read it with the critical thinking from both sides of the aisle. But people don't want to do that. They're going through and they're highlighting things they can use in their next Twitter post. And it's a really dangerous thing to do with statistics. Or just studies in general, but there's no cure for it. People are just going to do this kind of thing. So you have to read the articles, and it takes time and effort, and you have to have a certain level of education. And let's face it, a lot of the articles are not written for, clarity. They're written to impress people with their pollutant language, and that creates problems as well. So if you followed my channel, and everybody out there probably has to some degree, you'll know I walk through the damn thing line by line, but you have to do that.
And that happens on both sides. I think.
No, sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Sean, if I may, Johnny clarified the point. Basically, that's what I mean, and that's one thing. And the other, guys, whoever is watching, honestly, check Johnny's channel, because there's he did excellent work going over the Missed Pages article from New York Times. Was it New York Times about Kyle Rittenhouse that you made a series?
That hit piece.
3 videos or 4? How many did you make? The article, there's audio version of it, and that alone is 1 hour long. But I would honestly recommend watching, Johnny's videos on it, 2 hours in total or something like that, because you will just see how journalists can bullshit with the truth. They will, say, we bit here, we bit there, manipulate you, the audience, manipulate the masses, to basically go a certain direction, that is completely other than the truth, despite saying the truth. It's I must give a credit to Miss Page. That is a masterclass in propaganda,
Yeah, he's good at it. Okay, let's go on to somebody else.
Yes. Here, I wanted to this. Barrel shroud. Oh no, barrel shrouds are a safety feature. What I see quite a lot, and in Europe, and this is a very big issue, is that plenty of the things that are being banned are simply, it doesn't make sense to ban those. Those are safety features, or they basically that politicians that don't understand firearms at all are the ones who are making decisions on it, and they are actually making the situation worse.
Yeah, it's a correlation fallacy.
What's a barrel shroud?
Johnny?
It's a part around a barrel that you can grab a hold of while you're shooting. And so it makes it look like very military. And that's another issue, is that if the rifle looks like it's military, they're more likely to support the ban of it. And so they go after the superficial, but that's what can you do?
Yeah, if the one of the things that they, for example, banned in Europe and that pisses me off are folding stocks, where you could still operate you can still further operate when you have the stock folded. And that is a big problem because the issue is they argue that it is to limit the usability of this for example terrorists. Okay, well, the only thing is that they will carry it under a trench coat, and it sucks to fire basically without the stock. You know what I mean? You are incredibly inaccurate, without the stock.
Well,
however, it is a great.
The general problem is that they're trying to. Are you guys there?
Yeah.
Okay. The problem is that they're trying to ban the rifles that are causing the carnage, but they don't really understand rifles enough. So they pick on things that they think are characteristics, I would say critical characteristics of an assault rifle, as they call it, but it's superficial. So ultimately, that's where all this stuff is coming from.
Right. And what I wanted to say that is that by banning these stocks that can be folded and still the gun can be operational, they are mainly used by people who travel in a car or such, and they need to fire from inside of the car because they were, for example, ambushed, simply the shit hit the fan, a situation, and they need to fire a few rounds off before they either drive away or get out of the car and can deploy the stock, then it is basically just to shoot, to scare away the bad guys. And well, who does most of the ambushing? Well, criminals and terrorists. It literally doesn't make sense. Why would you ban it? And you might be saying that, oh, well, in Europe, really, ambushes, not in most of it, but for example, in Italy, with mafia, in Sicily, Cosa Nostra, that is a legitimate, concern. That really happens there.
Okay. Well, I'd like to kind of respond to these questions in the more general sense, because we could spend time on folding stocks, but ultimately, I don't think that is. I don't know if that's really much of an issue in this country.
Yeah, no, I just that was an example of politicians, of leaders basically making pulling, or not understanding the firearms, making bans that ultimately make the situation even worse. You know what I mean? For law-abiding citizens, while not improving the safety. Sean, guys, if you think, that happens also in the US, where politicians who don't understand, firearms, that's where I was going at.
I think, for me, it's not. I agree that it's not really addressing the issue. My issue always comes back to. When we talk about open carry, when we talk about these guns and how they look in public, I'm more worried about who has those guns sort of in public and their ability to make decisions to positively impact the situation. I mean, we've talked about police officers who freeze under pressure, and they've had training, not only de-escalation training, but training in how and when to use their firearm. And in using Oklahoma as an example, because it meets the prerequisite for what I'm concerned about, you have people who believe they're going to carry their gun into a situation and be able to make a discernible difference. And most of the time, that's not going to be the case. And I've seen interviews, and it's a call to authority, and I don't want to use it because it's not. Look it up. I guess is the mantra. You're going to see a lot of people who train Navy SEALs, who train Marines, who'll say that, most citizens with guns aren't going to be able to make a discernible difference. Yeah, there will be some. But when you see shooting and you have a gun, most people probably aren't going to be in the best position or have the training to make the right decision. And if we have AR-15s, let's say, as sort of open carry, it makes it harder to discern who's the good and who's the bad, especially, if anybody can get them. And I think those are the issues that I struggle with. Not so much what the gun looks like. It's who has the gun and how do we distinguish from the bad people.
I'm not a big fan of open carry. I prefer the concealed carry myself. And that is, first of all, I don't want people to know I've got a gun. I'm not there to show off, and I'm not there to, make a statement. So and I carry this kind of like a big bag, it's like a attaché case or whatever. It's very Western, very manly. So I don't want to hear any crap. But that's where I carry it. But I'm not going to pull that thing out. I've actually pulled it out twice so far, and in both cases, I slipped it back in with no incident. I'm good with that. Carrying around with an AR-15 on your back, that's not me. And I would prefer that if you're going to carry a weapon, you might want to just not make it so conspicuous. However, I will say this as well. If I see a guy walking around and he's got the AR-15 on his back, I'm not really concerned about him. I'm really not. And I'm not concerned about the guy walking around with a 38 showing on his belt. It's the guy walking around with the gun in a paper bag is what I worry about. And those people, for the most part, that I see that are carrying guns are the most law-abiding people around. It's the person you don't see with the gun is the one that's going to kill you. That's all I have to say.
And that's just your opinion, though, really, at the end of the day. Yeah.
Sean, if I may, if I understood your point correctly, is that if, let's say, shit hits the fan, and I'm sorry if I'm using profanity and you don't like it on our channel.
No, I've said it before. I didn't clear it with you.
I'm rather, hard on the palm of my hand. You know what I mean? I don't have a really filter. I say it like how I see it. So if I understand your point correctly, you basically are saying that in vast majority of the time when there's a mass shooting, the let's say law-abiding gun owners will not make the difference, or will freeze up, will whatever, they don't have the training. Is that correct?
So it's I don't know that I would say that qualifies exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
If we were just to sort of, if we were to look at people that are trained to deal with a threat, or let's say police officers or in the military. I know we look at Navy SEALs. I saw Jocko Willing talking about, before Navy SEALs go into an environment where they are dealing with hostiles, they will train for the better part of like 13 or 14 months or something. And a lot of that training is into de-escalation. So if we look at Kyle Rittenhouse as an example, I think this highlights what we're talking about. I believe he went in with good intention as a dumb kid with a gun on his back. And he didn't have the training in de-escalation. He made himself, I guess, a target for people coming in. And if I was a shop owner, Kyle Rittenhouse is the last person I'd want showing up in front of my property with an AR-15, because he's a child. He's not prepared to deal with that. And I think that's indicative of a lot of people who, have good intentions, but they don't have the training. Who you're going to shoot and when you're going to shoot somebody isn't something you can just, get lucky about. You might make a right decision, but the people that are carrying the guns, I want some reassurance that they know how and when to use that. And I don't have that if there's no sort of filter.
I have to disagree on Kyle though.
I knew you would.
Johnny,
I don't watch him for. Go ahead.
If I may moderate it here a wee bit, I would say that Kyle Rittenhouse is it is far more nuanced than you just put, and I don't want to strafe away from the topic, you know what I mean? But I understand your point, there are definitely people who, let's say, think guns are cool and stuff like that, you know what I mean? I would, however, say that Kyle is honestly an exception, but that is for discussion for another day. I don't want to strafe into that much, but if you would, but I understand your point, Johnny, if you, let's say omit Kyle here, and if it's possible,
so
I can respond to
my feeling about it is, it just really comes down to, if somebody does break in, what am I going to do? And if you can answer that affirmatively, and I think that you're as well trained as anybody else, because most of the time when cops freeze up, they weren't anticipating that decision. And I think that if you're going to carry a gun, and this happened, by the way, and I was in a Starbucks, and a guy came in, he was homeless, and he started just knocking over, like the displays and stuff. And then he starts to approach the barista behind the counter. I put my hand down and I had it on my gun. I'm asking myself, under what conditions am I going to use this? And it turns out that he didn't do anything that was endanger that person behind. So I just took my hand off the gun and he walked out. But I think what's happening is people are not asking themselves that question. If somebody walks through this door right now What will I do? You have to answer that question before you really can take on the responsibility. I don't think it's training. I just think that you just have to be cognizant of the outcome, what's going to happen, be aware that this is not a toy, and that there are going to be some severe ramifications coming down your way if you use this weapon. Are you willing to take that on in an effort to save lives? Now, if the training you're talking about is just really designed on that, I would actually not be opposed to that. But like I say, you could go through a full police academy, and what happens in the field? They freeze up.
But you're making my argument kind of in a way. I'm not saying it to be facetious.
I acknowledge that.
Because I don't, and I have little problem to a degree with people having guns in their home. I mean, even if we referenced the West, there was a lot of towns in the Wild West who banned guns from being open on display because it was provocative, and when people would get drunk, they make bad decisions. And you're talking about somebody in the heat of the moment having to make a serious series of complicated questions and answers and then reacting to that. And whilst, Johnny, I think, from just the limited interactions we have, I think you would probably make the right decision. I don't know, and you don't know either. And
no,
and
none of us know.
No, but
that includes Navy SEALs and cops and everybody else.
But that's why I don't like the idea that open or even concealed carry, the idea that guns are legal in sort of the public setting like that. Statistically, you are fine. And I appreciate the argument that everybody here is going to say is there's 400 million guns and there's a shit ton of bad people that have guns. Well, again, we just said Oklahoma is a safe place to be. So why am I all of a sudden worried about being shot if it's a safe place to be? I mean, we're talking about statistically anomalous situations in which people who don't have the wherewithal to react are being called on to react.
Matt,
well, go ahead.
If I may, I would like to use analogy that carrying a firearm is like having a fire extinguisher in your car. You know what I mean? You are not carrying that that you will get into a gunfight, or for example, someone attacks you with a knife, so on. Yeah, you are carrying it just in case that happens. The same amount, if I would know if I go to, for example, a shop and someone will attack me, well, I call the cops and don't go to the shop, right? But the same principle as if I know there will be a fire, I will call a fire brigade or fire department, and you know what I mean, and not try to extinguish that fire on my own. You know what I mean? But it is like shit hit the fan right here, right now. It is you or him. So
I want to follow up. You know what? If I'm in a crowded store, okay, and there's a guy in there that's carrying a gun for self-protection, all right, and somebody comes in and they just start shooting up, I can't necessarily depend on that guy to make the right decisions, but it sure beats the hell out of having nobody. I mean, if you don't have anybody in that room with a gun, you're dead. The most helpless feeling in the world is to be caught without any means of protection. I think I would take my chances. I mean, he might not do everything right, and he might kill me by accident. Am I missing?
No,
somebody showed up at Paul's.
Okay.
I was just saying goodbye.
So I mean, that's a counter argument that I'll take my chances. I'd rather have somebody there with a gun, even though he may not use it properly, than to sit there and just let some guy just smoke me. I just can't accept that.
But how do you think is it feasible, or is it possible to assume there's more people misusing guns with good intention that would, I guess, outcount the instances? Because I think it's rare. It's not often. I know we highlight the pregnant mother who protected somebody with the AR-15, but I don't think those stories are there. But I don't think they're commonplace. I think it's more commonplace that
the instances where a person is irresponsible, ends up killing people while trying to defend others, that's really rare. I don't think I've ever even heard of such a thing, but I'm sure it's happened. But I mean, there's plenty of stories of people defending themselves and others. Irresponsibly killing people that didn't have to die is something I have not really heard much about. Now, it could be that we just don't get reports of it, and that's another problem.
Might, if I may, like step here, like Sean, would you be, let's say, more comfortable with people carrying, firearms, like in self-defense, if there would be those, like prerequisites to own a firearm as in Czech Republic, like especially when it comes to the minimal training and stuff like that?
I mean, so living in the United Kingdom, how do I word this? I am safer in the United Kingdom. Everybody listening to this, I'm an American who's lived in America and has spent 16 years in the United Kingdom. I'm 44, so I spent a significant amount of time in both countries. I can't stress how much safer I feel here, and how I don't feel like I'm lacking liberty or freedom to do what I want to do. I think a lot of people referencing freedom and the government taking over, I think they're talking points, when in reality they want to feel safe. And I think that's a fair argument. I want to feel safe. If you're referencing the Second Amendment is your sole reason, and the government could take over at any point, that's a load of shit. Doesn't matter how many people with a militia have a gun. The government at this stage is so big and so powerful, it's not going to make a difference. So I accept.
I disagree with that.
I disagree with that too.
You can disagree with that. You can certainly disagree with that. And no, but my point is, I think people want guns to feel safe, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, and I would suggest that people say, well, guns, everything's so dangerous in the United States because of guns. Well, that's why I want a gun.
Yeah, but and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that we have decided in the U.S. that we are going to accept. And I straight off the point, Paul, and it's dementia. I'm getting old, but the laws in the Czech Republic, what they've stated, for me, I'm fine with that, because I know that if you have a gun and you're open carrying, that says one of two things. One, you illegally have a gun, and you're some dipshit who just thought it was cool and didn't have I'm going to use this impulse control to wait until you've gone through the proper measures to get a gun. Or you're somebody who's been through, some checks and balances. We know that you're mentally and physically sound. We know you know how to load and reload it. We know you have good trigger discipline, and we know that you haven't displayed stupid tendencies. Then I feel a lot better about that. But if I'm in Oklahoma and I see you with a gun, who the fuck knows? You could have just turned 18 and wanted a gun, and you want to carry it around because it feels cool. That bothers me.
Yeah, and Sean, here, guys, especially our audience, I must say Sean has here a good point, is because, and we should be angry not at Sean but at the members of gun owning community who are honestly just dipshits and think firearms are cool, because in the end I don't know a single gun owner, like a serious gun owner, that would think that possessing a gun makes him a man. For example, I know that you reacted, to a great video, like on your live stream, and that is true. But it is rather. But what you have is rather are people who are entering, or are not even outside of the gun community. And they are looking from outside in, and they don't understand, basically everything, the ins and outs, how, the gun community works and stuff like that. Because I tell you, I don't know a single gun owner that would think of himself as more of a man or something like that he has a gun and his neighbor, for example, doesn't. That's simply but again, there are people like that. And we should not be, angry here at Sean, for pointing it out. We should be basically angry at those dipshits that cause these problems.
They can be angry. I have no problem them being angry with me. I'm perfectly able to handle that. But I think when I speak to people here about, some of the things that the people I'm talking to right now want, not these people, but just the general gun advocate public, to be able to say to a Brit, look, more guns equals less gun deaths. So therefore, America being safe means that everybody is a holster in church and in the store. The schools have metal detectors, and every teacher has a gun. And it's like for people here, it's like this weird dystopian future that, it's almost like, what is it? The film Escape from LA?
LA.
Yeah, you kind of go back to these sort of sci-fi films where, everybody is packing. It's like this weird dystopian future when you talk to people in Britain about this sort of ideal community in America. And it's so nice in Britain to not, have to see kids do active shooter scenarios, or it's just so nice that when somebody acts crazy in a supermarket here, they don't have a gun. I love that. That's fucking great. For me, that's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I'll also say though that I think that in this, I hate to do the prophecy fallacy, right? Which is like basing your argument over something that you're only predicting. But I have a feeling that you're going to start to see some gun crime in Britain. And I have a feeling the 3D printing guns is going to start to drive a lot of that. Now you're going to be running into situations where there is a guy with a gun and nobody has anything. I think that in 20 years, you're going to encounter these problems that we're having. Not to the same level, but I think that you're going to have to address them in England. It's not my problem. I mean,
yeah, and I, I don't agree. I that's fine. I respect your opinion, but even I think if you take a look at if you were to speak to, let's say, somebody who's trained in like a police officer who's training other police officers. I have a mate who's an American here who lives here, and he's a British police officer in London. And he would say that if there is a gun, the safest thing for you to do is to just run. If you engage that person, there's a statistically good chance you are going to get shot. A significantly better chance that you're going to get shot.
So sometimes it's not an option.
No, but that isn't a statistic. Like those situations.
I understand you.
Yeah,
I understand you, but you must understand something about gun. Vast majority of gun owners would do the same thing. There are a few exceptions, and I can give you one that actually makes me proud of my countrymen. But vast majority of gun owners would basically in that situation gather their family, or friends or whatever, and escort them out of the danger zone if they can help it. What I mean? If they have control over that, what I mean. But sometimes you simply don't have a choice. What I mean? I don't know if if I may ask you, one of the things that I do constantly is trying to, when I come to a position, all right, if I have a certain position, I'm actually subscribing and watching more content that contradicts it. And if I may, do you watch, for example, channel Active Self-Protection?
No, I saw a few people referencing it in the chat.
Yeah, I would honestly recommend that you subscribe to it and start watching it, and go maybe through a few videos, because it is important, not to get locked in your own echo chamber, here. And I know, there are people getting hurt. There are even people getting killed, and many people are not comfortable with that. But unless you basically get familiarized, with how situations can go wrong, and stuff like that, it makes you, you have then gaping hole in, let's say, knowledge, or I don't know how to say that, basically when it comes to these discussions, when it comes to how it works, and stuff like that. I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
But it's very clear, because I think I don't stick in echo. So when I went into this week, these last couple of weeks, I was trying to find arguments to support, having a gun in public. I was looking up any information to make the argument, in situations where it would be good for me or wise for me to have a gun to protect myself. And that's how I went about that. Now, invariably, because of my views, I am probably going to stray into some level of echo chamber.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't necessarily believe that there's enough situations in which me having a gun, in let's say a public instance, and maybe part of it is I don't have the experience of living in America anymore. Maybe America is so wild west now that it's something I need to be prepared for, which makes me sad, and it's not something that I like to hear about. My family lives in the States, and if it's advisable for them to carry a gun when they go to the ShopRite, that's a concern. And that's something that we're just accepting as reality.
Yep. Johnny, I don't know if you have a retort to that.
I'm sorry, I got distracted by the text message from my daughter because it's Father's Day. Can you ask the question to me or whatever?
If you have a retort, to what was being said, right now, because I want to address something from audience.
Go ahead and move on. I'm sorry, okay. I got phased out there.
Schrodinger's cat, I would like to basically call you out, Vivid, on this. It is because you to a degree care about what I think, you know what I mean, and I'm quite pro-gun, and I'm also an outsider, you know what I mean. So be careful. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, we are here making a content. I personally don't argue for one side or the other. In the end, you know, like decide yourself. You know, I'm just saying basically facts and stuff like that. You know, like Sean is making, you know, what he argues. But in the end, the decision is always up for you. We are just having a discussion, you know. So this is, you know, like what I often see is that, we don't care what foreigners think and stuff like that. Well, I don't think either, you know, like either way.
By the way,
you know,
Paul,
like, or we are making points. Yeah. So
Sean is actually an American, so he, you know. Come on.
I know how to answer. Hold on 1 second. 1 second. I can fix this.
Yeah.
Hey guys, what do you think about Schrodinger's cat? Yeah. They've just said they really care about you and they want you to be okay. So I just want to. I've heard from the English people. They're right out the window. You're okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So back on my point, Sean's actually an American, so he does have an understanding with perspective here. And Paul is pro-gun, so his voice matters. So that's how it goes.
Anyway, I guess, you know, since we time is limited and stuff like that, I would like to move. We forgot to go over AR-15s and sexual rifles specifically, Sean. You know, like so, you know, what are your, let's say, gripes with civilians possessing, you know, like AR-15?
Well, I think it all comes back to, again, I agree. And one of the things that Dixon said, and I called him out on it on our last show, 80% or 75% of mass shootings are done with handguns in the United States. So if that's statistics, that is favorable for the audience here, winner. But, you know, the AR-15s aren't necessarily a greater issue. And I have no problem with people having them at home, but they're like anything. I think, again, if I go back to that Colin Noir interview on Joe Rogan, and I think everybody here would really enjoy that. He speaks very well of gun rights and advocates the Second Amendment, you know, to the degree that everybody here would. You know, the AR-15 for me, it's much like if you get a car, it's a dangerous thing. You need to be licensed, you need to be trained to use it. And I think the AR-15 is indicative of that. But I agree. It's a great hunting rifle. It's from what I've read, it's very accurate. It's something that shoots quite quickly. And as Johnny said, you know, there's game that moves quite quick, and one shot and a reload isn't going to be enough to knock it down. So I don't have a problem with guns specifically. It's the behavior and the culture that I hate.
Okay. Johnny, you know, since you're part of that culture, you know, like any retort?
Oh, I'm sorry. What was your question again?
Any retort, you know, like to that, since you are part of that culture? Kano?
No, I actually, except for his solutions, in terms of training stuff, I mean, I disagree with him on a lot of that. But overall, I agree with what he said. You know, it's okay. That's all I have. I mean, I don't have anything else to add to it.
Yeah, I think you're not going to get from. I think for me, and maybe Dixon kind of fell down that trap. I don't know enough to make a judgment on weapons, guns, handguns, and I don't. Yeah, there's a lot of mass shootings that have happened with high-powered weapons, but there's things that I think could have easily caught those out to a degree. You know, some of the shootings, like the 18-year-old, I know Uvalde to death, but you know, if that 18-year-old had to jump through more hoops, it's not as if he's going to be sophisticated enough to go to the black market and find a gun. If he had to jump through a few hoops to get it. And that's sort of where my position is set in stone.
I think that the age should be raised to 21 for just pretty much everything, voting.
I agree with that. Yeah.
You know, I just wanted to say that there was someone talking about bump stocks and stuff like that, and I know, you know, he was basically in favor of that. And if I may, I don't see any, like, basically any reason for bump stocks to, like, I mean, it's fun. You know what I mean? And you have the freedom and stuff like that. I get that, yeah. But guys, if you would basically consider this, you know, like, what is the practical effect that gives you, you know, like the bump stock gives you? You mentioned their safety, that you can bump fire more accurately, but your accuracy is still shit. I'll be honest, like you're shooting from a bump, like with a bump stock, still, like there's so much movement, and stuff like that. And you need to consider everything is a compromise, everything is a balance you need to strike, but on the other hand, who it gives a great advantage to are mass shooters, you know what I mean? So when it comes to specifically bump stocks, you know what I mean? It's basically no benefit for a law-abiding self-defender, but on the other hand, a great benefit to a mass shooter, you know what I mean? So I don't see any point for bump stocks, like basically being legal. But hey, in the end, again, your country decide what you will.
Yeah, I think and that's where we start to differentiate between a right and a privilege. We talked about this conversation with my brother-in-law a little bit, and there's a lot of Brits that would say that you have a right to protect yourself, and I think the debate is to what degree, can you protect yourself? What is that right? When we get into things like bump stocks, that's something that if let's say it was made legal, it needs to be regulated to hell. You need, like in Czech Republic, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you need to state why you want a specific gun, protection, hunting, and bump stock. It's a toy. Is it not? Is it like what?
Yeah,
service?
basically, bump stock is a toy. There, like if I may, you can bump fire without like a bump stock, but you are incredibly inaccurate that even when shooting into a crowd, if you would be a mass shooter, it really hinders your effectiveness if your goal is to kill as many people as possible. But on the other hand, when you have the bump stock, like it improves your accuracy enough for a mass shooter to commit mass shooting. However, it will not improve your accuracy enough that I would trust myself firing with a bump stock in my home with my family. Yeah, so that's the point.
The paddock shooting in Las Vegas is probably one of the rare instances where the bump stock, made that far more lethal. For the most part, as Paul said, anything on fully automatic, that barrel is going to rise, and you're just going to end up spraying the room, really too high. But I'm not going to die on that bump stock hill. As far as I'm concerned, and I know a lot of pro Second Amendment are going to be all over me about it. But the bump stock is a way to configure around a law about converting semi-auto to auto. And if that's what we give up, because frankly, I don't see any utility in having one. And, and so I don't see any infringement on that. At the same time, for the gun control people, it's not going to help you at all. Getting rid of bump stocks is not going to have any effect on that shit.
Yeah, Tyler, if I may, here you're making Cherry Mikulczyk can shoot faster with semi-auto. Yeah, dude, he's literally the best in the world. You know what I mean? You want to make a mass shooting as difficult for a person, and when you say that they don't help mass shooters, I greatly disagree with that. I don't want to have a discussion here because you cannot make your points as well as I can, on camera. So that's kind of unfair to you and stuff like that. If you would like to talk about this, I'm more than willing to do that. So you can contact me. We can talk about it. I greatly disagree with this. Full automatic weapons absolutely help, mass shooters.
Yeah, I disagree with you on that, Paul, but that's another story, I guess.
Tyler had one comment that he asked directly that I'm happy to address. And that's the one about London, which I think is an interesting question to talk about.
I have it actually highlighted.
Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Because I think I'm pretty sure that if we were to look up the stats, because I know how much everybody here loves stats, London's homicide rate is quite a bit lower than every major U.S. city. And I've spent a lot of time in London. I have friends that live in different areas, been out late, did the same in Manchester, which is actually, in a lot of people's views, in certain areas, a bit more dicey than London. And I personally feel safer in all of those cities. If somebody's coming at me with a knife, I don't feel like I'm dying today. And generally, gun crime is 30 people died from a gunshot in England total last year, as in 2019. So I feel like my chances of surviving London are pretty damn good. There's areas of Chicago I'm not feeling too good. But that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, here's I think one of the things that you this is a philosophical difference. Yeah? In the end, I don't care if, I know I will be coming as cold, but I would ask you, Sean, like to basically that people have different values, different points on life and stuff like that, yeah, to keep it in mind. Yeah. In the end, I don't care that much that other people die. What is important to me that I don't die. You know what I mean? So if you increase, like to some degree, like deaths in a country, I basically still prefer of me being safe. Like then it is, like obviously debate as to how much you can increase, like those deaths, what I mean, and stuff like that. But this is I would wager, like on it, that this is a mindset of a lot of pro-gun people.
By the way, Sean, the way to be safe in this country is just look up the mayor. If it's a Democrat, you stay the hell out of that city, and you'll be fine.
I don't think you can support that. I don't think you can support that argument. That is all speculation at best. Yeah. It's for me. I think it always comes down to for everybody here who has a gun and carries a gun. A lot of times it's more for peace of mind than it is for practical safety. And the instances of people who I don't want to go off on a tangent, but this to me is indicative of what we can see where there's plenty of guns. Where I was watching one of these true crime shows, and there was a Marine. I don't know if you've seen the shows where it's there's neighbors. It's about neighbors who go to war with each other. And this one guy was a Marine, been in the Marines for years. He was some sort of special forces guy. He had guns in his house. And this guy moved in next door, and they always start off friends, and then they somehow turn into enemies. And everybody in the neighborhood loved this guy. And this guy who moved in was picking on this Marine for months and months until he almost ran over his dog. And as a dog owner, I kind of get that. And then one day he decided he was going to take action, grabbed his gun, wrote a letter to say, "I'm sorry." And he went and he plowed this couple down with his handgun, which he was, and this counters some of my arguments. He was well trained. He was in the Marines, but he had his breaking point, and he was the exact person that we wouldn't expect to have your breaking point. And I think, in situations when you have a gun, it's equally possible, if not, and the more guns you have, the more chance you're going to have of somebody snapping, somebody who maybe doesn't have their shit together on a given day. Mental health is a difficult thing to deal with. And I think that's why in this country I feel safer, because there's less opportunities for people who, are having a bad day to just make a bad decision. With a knife, it's very hard to make a bad decision like you can with a gun.
Well, if I may, actually example from UK from a few years back, a Czech, citizen was beaten to death, in London. Mm-hmm. That's why I'm aware of that, because it made national news here. By the way, this is like mind-boggling, because the perpetrator was actually found innocent, and you will see just how mind-boggling it is. And what basically happened was that there were a group of youths, that were riding bicycles, and they were in a kebab store, and a Czech citizen, by the way, working, for many years in UK, came in, and he just joked, as a friendly joke, he said, "Well, what is this, a bike gang?" And they took it, very badly, and they, basically started to fight with him. And he was then the Czech citizen was then choked out, and then he gathered himself up, walked out. By the way, this is all by admission of those who were initially charged there. He walked out, was going on his way. They got on their bikes, went in the same direction, not after him, but in same direction. He perceived it as they pursuing him. He turned around, took off his jacket, and let's say the leader took off a chain with a bike lock at the end, swung it at the man, hit him. He fell to the ground, KO'd completely, and then he swung twice more at his head, with the chain and the lock, like cracking skull and stuff like that, and then yelled, "See what you have made me do." And I'm just, well, first of all, how can this be, like how this man can be innocent, you know what I mean, like this perpetrator of this. I just don't understand that, like that is number one. But number two is that if you would be, this is an example of a situation, of a real world situation where nothing but a firearm will basically help you from quite a lot of, like attackers, you know what I mean? Because if, let's say, even if he would start fighting, the person, and he would not get hit in the head, you know what I mean, then others will pile on, and nothing but firearm will help you in that situation, and it is directly from the UK.
And I think that's going to be the case all over the world. The fact that happens a fifth of the time in the United Kingdom. Yeah, you're not saying a lack of a gun. Yeah, there may have been a situation where if he had a gun, he could have protected himself. But I guess what you would then be saying is everybody in the United Kingdom should be carrying a gun to ensure their safety, and we're discounting what the statistical, not statistical, I don't want to use that, but what the law of probability would say that would mean for the increase in gun deaths overall. You would see more gun deaths happening versus that sort of those isolated instances protecting that person.
Yeah. And I know you will say that, for example, we have, let's say a reasonable gun laws, like in your mind. But, so understand the Czech culture, and how I see it as well is that if you don't want a firearm, hey, that's completely fine. Just don't take away the right for the others. And so you understand only around 5% of people in Czech Republic are, have firearms, despite about the support for legal ownership, is overwhelming. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think that kind of supports my view that you can have guns and you can have them responsibly, but having 400 million guns makes the United States less safe, and that's a fact. And I think my understanding, if we were to speak to everybody here, we say, yeah, a shit ton of people are going to die, but that's the price of liberty. There's nothing we can do about it. And you know what? Yeah, it's all well and good. You can be safe and not get shot. And a fifth of the time people are going to die. But I don't think that's going to change. That instance you described could happen in the Czech Republic. That doesn't stop that from happening, especially given how many people are carrying guns in the Czech Republic.
And my argument is that the 400 million guns and all the crime and all that, if it is bad as described, and that's a matter of opinion, but I can understand perfectly well why people would think that. That's the reason why I want a gun, is because of that. And all of the solutions about how to make gun crimes drop in this country seem to target me, but not the other person. And that's a problem. I mean,
I don't think they're targeting you. I think they're
targeting. What I mean is, I should say, the good guys with the guns, the people who want the guns for self-protection, the laws that are being put in place are the ones that are going to impact them. The ones on the other side, they don't care. And that's a problem when you have, for example, some young lady who's living in an apartment complex and her boyfriend has made threats. She needs something. And all of the statistics and the probability go out the window at that point. Because
the red flag laws aren't working.
What's that?
Is that because the red flag laws aren't working?
Well,
no, the boyfriend doesn't have to have a firearm. He can be just unarmed. Women are,
I was making a joke that I'm sure everybody in the chat thinks is hilarious.
Well, and keep in mind also, any kind of red flag thing you put in, it's going to have many instances where things didn't work out as planned.
Yeah,
but she needs something for herself. She doesn't care about the statistics in the rest of the country. She needs to take care of her own situation and to put roadblocks in front of her, because statistically, that's a problem. Ultimately, we're in charge of our own protection. There's nobody going to protect us. Police don't have to. So ultimately, if you're going to protect yourself, you're going to have some means of doing it. Maybe a knife is enough. almost never is. But yeah, I mean, keep in mind also, we don't have a force here that can protect people. The police aren't going to do it.
Oh, they're not trained enough in the U.S.
Well, they're not required to anyway.
We don't have time to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, definitely. Just police, like saving you. That is, police work is not really saving you specifically or protecting you. Specifically, it is basically protecting the society from the guy that killed you, attacked you, whatever, to find him, and arrest him. Anyway, guys, we're gonna have to go. Do you have Sean, Johnny? Do you have some final words?
I do have one final comment. You made, when I watched your video, you made a comment about my argument about the video games and Grand Theft Auto. I want to address that. You misunderstood my argument. My argument wasn't that the video games were going to cause this to happen. It was that the same kind of thrill that manifests when kids play this would also manifest in when you drive over people purposely.
Yeah.
And therefore, I was only trying to show that is a possible avenue for future mass shooters if they weren't able to carry out a mass shooting. Not that playing video games was going to cause it.
Well, I get that, and I think I was trying to make the point that Brits play the same games, and we don't see high instances of Brits, manifesting that behavior.
Universal healthcare is also a variable.
That's something we need to talk about at some point. I have a very unique perspective on that.
Anyway, yeah, guys. Sean, you have some final words, Party?
No, I appreciate the time. It's something that I'm not a natural debater, so to speak, and it's a conversation I was.
View this as a rather discussion, than debate, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I went into this. I've been living in the UK, and I've not really engaged anybody who had a dissenting view on guns. So this was a very, I wouldn't say uncomfortable, but this was foreign territory for me, quite literally. And I appreciate the dialogue we've had. I think my view, I think I'm walking away from this a bit endeared that, Johnny and I, let's say, coming from two sides of it, I think we do have quite a lot of middle ground. I think a lot of the stuff we debate I don't think there's a lot of it there. I think there's a lot of middle ground that we can find. And I hope that we see other people having these types of conversations, because my big takeaway from everything I see online is people get into their right and left camps, and they can't, even people in the chat, there's people here that probably will never look at things from the perspective of somebody living in Britain. And I want to see people looking at things from the perspective of a gun owner and somebody from the perspective of someone who feels vulnerable, and maybe have a conversation to find middle ground, because we don't do that anymore.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Definitely have encountered this situation quite a lot, since I started this YouTube channel. Guys, unless you have anything to say, I would just like to add that thank you for watching to everyone. And one more thing, I've noticed there's quite a lot of passions in the chat. In the future, if I may suggest, if you would be willing to come on, I'm open to that. And for example, if 1 or 2 points, to basically have a short exchange with us, at least you don't have to be on camera, but it is not an easy task to specifically decode, even when you write it, what I mean, you cannot communicate as effectively as, via, talking to us. So I honestly, on my channel, I would be open to sending, links for the audience for a short while to come on in, and maybe, especially if you disagree with us, then to make your points better. So anyway, thanks for watching. Yeah, so we're gonna go.
Thanks, Sean, for joining in. That was a lot of fun.
I enjoyed it. Thank you for putting up with me.
Awesome, and it is rather rare that people who disagree talk nowadays, and so I would like to Sean to thank you very much, because you came in on, and it definitely takes some courage, to speak with people that disagree with you.
By the way, I should also mention that this gun control debate we had didn't delve into the same crap that most of them do.
Yeah, I agree.
That's actually rather extraordinary, because I've been in a lot of these and I've watched a lot of them, and the argumentation tends to get just go to hell.
Yeah,
it didn't happen here, and I think that's really important to point out.
Yeah.
Okay. So Anyway, cheers, mates, and see ya next time.
All right, take care.